Rise of the European Emperor by Taishang Laoniao.
Chapter 1821, Why was Marin so wary of France? This matter started with the 100 Years' War. At that time, King Edward III of England was the grandson of King Philip IV of France and the nephew of Charles IV, the last king of the Capetian dynasty. Therefore, according to general management, he should have the right to inherit the French throne. But the French were unwilling to accept an English king as their own monarch, so they selected Philip VI from the Capetian royal branch to inherit the French throne, which angered Edward III and triggered the 100 Years' War between England and France, that lasted for 100 years. Since then, for this reason, until Napoleon came to power in 1801, the King of England has always claimed that he is the authentic King of France, and the French monarchs starting from Philip VI are all tyrants. In retaliation, the French kings after Philip VI also claimed sovereignty over England. Of course, France's claim is a bit of a trick. But France is strong. Even if it is unreasonable, no one dares to say anything. Moreover, it is precisely because they know that the King of England has more advantages in legal theory. Therefore, the later King of France has always been hostile to the British royal family. Even, they want to annex the Kingdom of England to end this dispute. Because the French know very well that England has a legal advantage. If the national strength is average, the two countries will be at peace. Once it becomes strong, it will inevitably covet the throne of France. Therefore, France has always adopted an attitude of suppressing and even wanting to destroy England. If the status quo remains unchanged, the French will naturally not have so many worries. Even if the Calais fortress is lost, it is only a little threatening. Because, since the late period of the 100 Years' War, England has no longer been able to confront the French on land. Even if the King of England claims to own the French throne, it is just a claim. Because the English have no ability to compete with the French army on land, at most they can only shout. But if the North Sea Kingdom and England merge, it will be fatal. England's shortcoming is the army, and the North Sea Kingdom happens to be a country with a strong army, and even France has some concerns. England already has a certain army strength. Once it merges with the North Sea Kingdom, it can obtain land forces that are enough to threaten the security of France. With the ability to threaten the French land, plus a certain legal support, this is very fatal. In addition, France now has two powerful enemies, Spain and the Habsburg family. This is simply a death warrant. Therefore, if the North Sea Kingdom and England unite, the French will definitely go crazy. At that time, they are very likely to strike first and attack the North Sea Kingdom. Not to mention destroying the North Sea Kingdom, at least force the North Sea Kingdom and England to dissolve the alliance to avoid a fatal threat to France. Therefore, it is not a question of whether Marin wants to fight or not, but once Caesar and Princess Margaret marry, the French will definitely take action. Based on this judgment, Marin did not dare to publicly confirm the marriage of Caesar and Princess Margaret now, but first quietly prepared to build border fortifications in the North Sea Kingdom, waiting for the moment when the French attack. Moreover, Marin can conclude that once the French begin to attack, the French brothers such as the Duchy of Lorraine, the Electorate of Saxony, and the Electorate of Brandenburg, who have a grudge against Marin, will definitely take advantage of the fire and attack the North Sea Kingdom from another direction. As for legal principles, not necessary. These princes account for most of the imperial court of princes, and the votes are not in vain. At that time, you can just find a reason to get away with it. Therefore, at that time, the North Sea Kingdom will face the biggest challenge facing the attack of France and the coalition of princes at the same time. In such a bad situation, the country will be destroyed if you are not careful. Therefore, Marin has been acting as a grandson, focusing on development and not daring to act rashly. However, if this battle can be won, the North Sea Kingdom will establish its hegemonic status in the German region. From then on, there is no need to shrink and pretend to be a grandson. Because the opponents are afraid of being beaten. However, it is estimated that it will be difficult to annihilate the enemy in turn. Because this time Marin may face hundreds of thousands of enemies. Not to mention destroying the opponent, it would be good to be able to hold on. Therefore, Marin will take a defensive position at that time, relying on strong cities and fortifications to keep the enemy out of the defense line and eventually win. At that time, Marin will inevitably ask the Spanish and Habsburg armies to attack the rear of France and force France to withdraw. Then, he can free up his hands to deal with the prince's coalition forces. If he can defeat the prince's coalition forces, he will inevitably reap great benefits. The most basic thing is to make the defeated princes cede land and pay compensation. He can even annex some princely states. When these benefits are digested, the religious war will almost start. At that time, annex a group of princely states. Well, it will be almost at the level of small Germany. At that time, he can turn around to deal with France. At worst, he can pull Spain and the Habsburg family together to divide France. As long as he annexes the northern part of the Greater Paris area and turns the English Channel into his own inland sea, he will achieve his strategic goal. At that time, a great empire including the northern regions of Germany and France and the entire Kingdom of England will appear in Europe. Then, he will use part of the land in the south of France to exchange the Netherlands with the Habsburg family. In this way, the entire North Sea, except Norway, and its surrounding areas will all be his territory. And the North Sea will become his own inland sea. Of course, no matter how good the plan is, it is just a plan. First of all, you have to withstand the anger of the French. Unlike the struggle for hegemony in Italy, which is only for the sake of interests, the alliance between the North Sea Kingdom and England will pose a fatal threat to the French royal family. Therefore, by then, the French may pay a greater price than the Italian War. Because it is about the ownership of the throne. Facing the full-strength France, plus the princes who took the opportunity to fish in troubled waters, it must be a tragic confrontation. Even Marin was ready to retreat to England first if he failed. After all, he did not dare to guarantee that he would win the decisive battle with a scale of more than 100,000 people. His plan looks beautiful, but what if something goes wrong during the execution? Or, what if the important generals are bribed or assassinated? Therefore, Marin has made the worst plan. If things cannot be done, he will retreat to England across the sea. Anyway, Auric is very close to the port of Emden, and it is not difficult for the whole family, including the nobles and soldiers under his command, to have a general retreat similar to the Dunkirk evacuation. But first, he must be fully prepared and try to win this battle. Only in this way can he have a chance to dominate Europe and become the top. Then, he can ask the Habsburg family for a crown and play as the Emperor of Europe. In other words, the next battle is related to whether Marin can successfully become the Emperor of Europe. In terms of importance, this battle is almost the Emperor of Europe battle that determines Marin's future. Chapter 1822 Savage Suicide Squad. As long as he can win this decisive battle, Marin's future road to becoming the Emperor of Europe will be a smooth road, without any obstacles. On the contrary. Therefore, no matter how much Marin values and overestimates his opponent, it is not too much. Only by paying attention can he be more likely to defeat his opponent. If he does not pay attention or is arrogant, he may lose his life. Marin is a coward. He not only likes to hide high manganese steel breastplate armor in his silk robe, but also likes to make full preparations to avoid GG. After starting to build border fortifications, the only thing that worries Marin now is probably the problem of insufficient manpower. In theory, Marin now has 6 legions in his hands, plus 10,000 sailors, and it is estimated that he can make up 60,000 to 70,000 troops. However, 2 legions are trapped in England and cannot be used at all. Therefore, Marin can only use 40,000 legions and more than 10,000 sailors to fight on his homeland. But the 6th legion needs to protect Goslar, the silver capital, and cannot be given up easily. Therefore, the troops that Marin can really use are currently only 30,000 regular troops and 10,000 sailors. Of course, Marin could also gather the 20,000 to 30,000 able-bodied men who had been fighting with the army all year round in East Frisia, train them, and make them have a certain combat effectiveness. But able-bodied men are able-bodied men. Although they are strong, they are not necessarily suitable for being soldiers and fighting. Just like Marin's selection of soldiers, the selection of qualified soldiers is not based on whether you are strong and powerful, but on whether you have courage. Only those with courage dare to move forward bravely on the battlefield and fight the enemy. Even if they are not strong enough, even if they cannot win, they dare to draw their swords and fight the enemy desperately. And those who have no courage, even if they have muscles all over their bodies, are afraid to fight the enemy. When they see the enemy coming, they are easily frightened and drop their weapons and run away. Therefore, for soldiers, the body can be exercised, and the shooting level can be fed with bullets. However, courage is innate and cannot be trained. Just like in the previous life, when Uncle Marin was sent to South Vietnam as a volunteer, the commander who was selecting people at that time gave him a task, to be alone in the middle of the night, without a flashlight, and carry the female corpse from a small house on a hill to another hill. In that era, although anti-superstition was promoted, people were still very afraid of ghosts. Anyone who could carry a female corpse in the dark in the middle of the night was courageous. Then, Uncle Marin was selected and went to South Vietnam as an artilleryman, specializing in bringing anti-aircraft guns to shoot American airplanes. This experience, Marin often heard Uncle brag at the wine table in his previous life. So, his ears were all calloused. After crossing, he also used this as a standard to select soldiers, so as not to select strong cowards. And because this era emphasizes cold weapon fighting, Marin simply selected those who were not afraid of injury and indomitable in the competition, which can be regarded as an improved version of carrying a female corpse in the middle of the night. In fact, Marin didn't know that this method of courage selection is generally used to select elites or dead soldiers, not ordinary soldiers. Therefore, Marin has selected tens of thousands of mercenaries over the years. In fact, ordinary mobilized soldiers do not value courage at all when selecting, as long as they are physically strong. Even obedient or not is not important. Anyway, in the army, you will be beaten to obey if you are disobedient. As for deserters, they will be executed. Like those conscripted soldiers, including the conscripts in later generations, how many are really passionate and brave? In the end, harsh military laws must be used to force these people to grow up. And the cruelest means of elimination is probably actual combat training. Many anti-Japanese war troops are often formed in a hurry. New recruits are young and strong recruits from villages that have been scourged by the devils, without any foundation. Of course, this is also a means of selecting soldiers using their hatred for the devils. Sometimes, hatred can make a coward burst out with unparalleled courage. As long as you fight a few more battles, ordinary people can become brave. No, it should be said that they have become numb. Only those few people who are really hopeless will be hopeless. But to be honest, in the era of hot weapons, fighting a war depends a bit on luck. Lying in the trench, who knows if the enemy's shells will happen to fall next to you and explode. Sometimes, you blink and your head is gone. In other words, in the war of hot weapons, many soldiers died before they had time to express their bravery or fear. In the era of cold weapons, fighting is face to face, not relying on luck. Therefore, the requirements for courage are even higher. Because fighting the enemy in person and being killed by stray bullets due to bad luck have different requirements for courage. Of course, the most challenging thing for people's courage is not the cold weapon battle, but the line of shooting. This is a real test of people's courage, because you can't even find a cover to avoid the bullets, you can only stand there stupidly and wait for the enemy to shoot. This is a bit like a turn-based game, but it is very cruel. Therefore, the harsh military law of modern armies is needed. Otherwise, ordinary soldiers really can't stand it. In other words, the reason why the army of the North Sea is so strong is that in addition to Marin's advanced battle formation tactics, the high-demand method of selecting soldiers is also an important guarantee. This method, similar to selecting volunteers or dead soldiers, makes the fighting will of the regular army of the North Sea very high, and the army is not easy to collapse. But it is precisely because of this high requirement that the number of people he recruited is limited. It is also thanks to Marin that he recruited soldiers in the German region. If he changed to another place, he might not be able to recruit tens of thousands of people. You know, the German region has a tradition of martial arts, and the people have always been fierce. In addition, Marin is selecting people from the more fierce mountain people, so it is naturally easy to recruit suitable soldiers. If it were another region, he would not be able to recruit tens of thousands of troops. However, the biggest problem now is that many vassal states in the southern region prohibit Marin from recruiting soldiers in the southern mountainous areas of Germany at will. This makes Marin very uncomfortable, because many good sources of soldiers are in the small mountain villages in the southern mountainous areas. There are many brave men among those fierce and even barbaric mountain people. Unfortunately, their lords did not allow Marin to pick people. I lack brave warriors, what should I do? Marin asked the sky speechlessly. Marin has decided that once the allied forces of the princes and France attack him together, when he wins, the first requirement is not to let those princes cede land and pay compensation, but to let them allow themselves to go to the princes in southern Germany to select fierce mountain people as soldiers. But before that, how can I get so many brave and fearless warriors? Brave, barbaric. These words flashed through Marin's mind. Suddenly, an idea jumped out. Or, I will learn from wild boar skin and catch savages to serve as a death squad. Although he did not agree with the barbaric dynasty of my Qing dynasty, Marin had to admit that after the establishment of the later Jin dynasty, the death army tactics of catching savages in the White Mountains and Black Waters in the northeast to act as a death squad to charge were really strong. Those raw urchins captured from the deep mountains and old forests were really barbaric and ignorant. As long as I catch them, fool them, brainwash them, and then, well, put them in cotton armor and ride them on a poor horse, they can serve as cavalry for the death squad. Maybe, I can also capture some fierce savages from the North American jungle and serve as the death squad. Chapter 1823, Ruthenians. How important are the savage death squad? Before the Qing army entered the pass, they were so powerful that they forced the Ming army to defend the city. Why? Because the Qing army had a group of fearless barbarians who acted as the death squads to charge forward and resist the guns and cannons of the Ming army. The real own people of the Qing army hid behind these savage death squads to kill. As a result, the casualties were all from the savage death squad, but the heads and military merits were all from the Eight Banners army. What kind of casualties led to collapse? I don't know. Anyway, the casualties were all captured savage death squads, not real Eight Banners soldiers. So, there is no such thing as casualties and collapse. As for the death of the savage death squad, at most, they can go to the forest to catch savage urchins. But after entering the pass, the Qing army was a little bit current. Because they could no longer catch the savages in the northeast jungle as the death squads, they had to rely on the Eight Banners soldiers themselves. Then, the Qing army was not so fierce. When Wu Sangue rebelled, more than 200,000 Eight Banners soldiers showed a decline and were almost finished. If the Green Camp soldiers had not stood up, the Qing dynasty might have lost and fled back to the northeast. Of course, this is also related to the corruption and degeneration of the Eight Banners soldiers after entering the pass. However, without the captured wild men as cannon fodder for the death squad, the combat effectiveness of the Eight Banners soldiers was also quite affected. Then, the Qing dynasty continued to capture the Jurchens as the death squad until the Qianlong period. However, since the arrest of the Jurchens and the Solons, the old name for ethnic minorities such as the Ewenki, Dor and Orokan, as the death squad, the combat effectiveness of the Qing army has become even worse. Later, it was completely impossible to beat anyone. In fact, this was not the original creation of the Qing dynasty, but a method used by the Mongols during the Genghis Khan period. The Mongolian cavalry had a heavy cavalry death squad at the time, responsible for charging in the front. Of course, it was not the brainless death squad with double knives in the movie Mongol King, but a normal death squad. But the Mongolian cavalry death squad, like the Central Plains Army, was composed of death row prisoners who had committed capital crimes and people who violated military law. Unlike the later Jin, they directly captured innocent wild Jurchens. In other words, they were not Jurchens at all, but people from other tribes, who were captured by the later Jin as savages and used as cannon fodder. After all, there were only more than 100,000 Zhenzhou Jurchens at that time, but they could not find so many death row prisoners, and they did not dare to waste population, so they could only capture those more ferocious raw Jurchen savages as cannon fodder death squads. However, this had a miraculous effect. The raw Jurchens and Solons captured in the deep mountains and old forests can be seen whether they are brave and savage when they are captured. If they resist fiercely, they will be slowly tamed by the method of hawking. Then, they will be used as the death squad to charge forward. As for those who are not fierce enough, they will simply be treated as ordinary slaves and go to graze and farm. And those unruly raw Jurchens and Solon savages, once they are successfully hawked, are willing to serve the Qing army. They are often savage and fearless, and are very suitable for resisting a round of gunfire from the Ming army. It is said that some of the savages captured from the deep mountains and old forests were tied to horses before the charge because of their poor riding skills. After the death squads in front attracted the Ming army to finish a round of gunfire, the real Eight Banners soldiers behind rushed to the front and swung their swords to kill the Ming army's fire gun soldiers. Nurhasai had been a slave to Li Qingliang, had been in the Ming army for a long time, and had read Romance of the Three Kingdoms, so he was familiar with the Ming army. He was not like those Mongolian cavalrymen who did not understand the Ming army's routines and would not charge blindly. He knew that the Ming army had only one round of shooting opportunities in front of the cavalry. As long as they survived this round of shooting, the cavalry could break into the fire gun formation and kill them at will. But there were very few Jurchens. If they let their own people serve as death squads, they would be exterminated after a few battles. Therefore, he had the innovative idea of capturing the savages in the old forests of northeast China to serve as death squads and endure that round of shooting for the real Jurchens. Then, it was time for the Jurchen cavalry to perform. It must be said that Yi Zhupi was indeed a tactical genius. His tactics just happened to restrain the fierce shooting of the Ming army in the first round, avoiding casualties of the Eight Banners soldiers. In addition, he also invented the shield cart tactics. No, the shield cart is not an invention. Because Qi Jiguang had already made a side carriage cart to resist the Mongolian cavalry's horse shooting. And Yi Zhupi reinforced the side carriage cart to make it able to resist firearms. The shield cart plus the wild death squad was the main tactic used by Yi Zhupi to restrain the Ming army, and it was also a very effective tactic. However, the shield cart tactics are not so invincible. As long as there is a row of hundreds of artillery like the French, the shield cart can be destroyed. Unfortunately, the artillery of the Ming army was mainly deployed on the city wall, and there were generally only a few Tiger squatting cannons in front of the field, which could not restrain the shield cart. Therefore, the Ming army always suffered in field battles. But when defending the city, the army of the later Jin dynasty was helpless because there were many cannons on the top of the city. It is said that the wild boar skin was also hit by a cannon. This is mainly because the Ming army did not have a modern movable gun carriage and could not carry too many infantry cannons on the march. If it were the Beihai army, it could carry hundreds of cannons at will and blow the shield carts of the later Jin dynasty into flying debris. After all, the cannons of Marin's army all have wheeled movable gun carriages at the level of war, which are very convenient to carry on the march. In fact, the practice of the Turkish army is also worth learning from the Turks put the artillery directly on the carts. At the same time, the carts with artillery were lined up in a row, and iron chains were tied between the carts to prevent the enemy cavalry from breaking in. Therefore, the Persian cavalry suffered a great loss in the face of the Turkish artillery formation. Fortunately, Marin gave Persia a warning in this time and space, and Ismail I did not foolishly rush into the Turkish artillery formation, so he did not suffer heavy losses and retained the capital to fight against the Turks. As long as Persia was not crippled, Turkey would not dare to attack Europe with all its strength. Because they were also afraid that the rear would be raided by Persia. Marin called Kohler, Schwartz, Kahn and others to discuss the matter of capturing barbarians in the jungles of North America as a suicide squad. Schwartz was very confused and asked, "The Indians can't ride horses at all, how can we let them serve as cavalry suicide squads?" Marin smiled triumphantly and said, "It's okay, just tie them to the horses." But Kohler pointed out the problem incisively, "But your majesty, our enemies don't have strong firepower, why should we send death cavalry to attract enemy shooting?" Marin was stunned for a moment. Yes, he was busy with the wild boar skin savage suicide squad tactics. But the problem is that his opponents are not the Ming army, and they don't have such strong firepower. And if it's not to attract firepower, what's the point of tying a barbarian who can't ride a horse to charge on horseback, except to give the opponents spearmen heads? Marin began to reflect and found that he was forcing things. At this time, Khan also interrupted, "Why do you want Indian barbarians to serve as the death squad? Those people are not easy to discipline. Moreover, it is difficult to communicate. If you want to find brave death squad members, why don't you find the Ruthenian barbarians from His Highness Simon? I remember His Highness Simon told me last time that there are many Ruthenian barbarians in Ukraine. They can be captured as barbarians and charge forward as the death squad." Chapter 1824 Barbarians and Cotton Armor. The so-called Ruthenians are the general term used by Lithuanians in this era for Ukrainians and Belarusians. In this era, the total number of Ukrainians and Belarusians is about 3.8 million. And the number of Ukrainians is close to 2 million. Because the Ukrainian region belongs to the southern border area of the Grand Duchy of Lithuania, Lithuania has poor control over the local area. Many Ukrainians ran to the southern steppes and did not obey the rule of the Lithuanians. You must know that although the Grand Duchy of Lithuania is named Lithuania, in fact, there are only 500,000 Lithuanians in the country, which is a minority. It is only by relying on powerful military force that the Ukrainians and Belarusians are ruled. It is also because of the insufficient population of the ruling nation that the Grand Duchy of Lithuania has a serious lack of control over the Ukrainian region. Later, when the Grand Duchy of Lithuania merged with Poland, it simply gave the difficult-to-control Ukrainian region to the Kingdom of Poland. After all, there are many Poles, and it is easier to control Ukraine. Therefore, in the Ukrainian steppes of this era, there are still many Ruthenian barbarians who yearn for freedom. If Simon wanted, he could send troops to the prairie to capture barbarians and serve as a death squad. These Ruthenian barbarians living on the prairie are not only tall, brave and fierce, but many of them can also ride horses. If they are captured as a death squad, they can not only be a death squad, but also a cavalry death squad, which is more authentic than Nurhasai's cavalry death squad. Because, in the wild boar skin cavalry death squad, many barbarians captured from the forest can't ride horses, and can only be tied to the back of horses to charge. And those Slavic barbarians living on the steppes of Eastern Europe often know how to ride horses. As long as they are tamed with the Qing dynasty's method of hawking, they will be barbaric death cavalry with excellent combat effectiveness. In fact, Marin didn't need to use eagle training methods to tame those Ruthenian barbarians. As long as he was willing to give them ergotu, these Slavs who were born to love drinking would be willing to serve him. Marin patted Khan on the shoulder and praised him, "Very good, I didn't expect that you would use your brain, Khan. As a reward, I'll give you a chicken leg at noon today." Khan said disdainfully, "Boss, are you too stingy? Moreover, you underestimate my appetite. How about this, give me a leg of lamb." Marin was stunned, and then said, "What a glutton." Then, Marin ignored Khan, the glutton, and asked Kohler to send someone to notify Jurgen, the commander of the Cossack cavalry corps stationed on the Luneburg Prairie, to send 2,000 Cossack cavalry on standby, ready to be sent to the Ukrainian region to capture the Ruthenian barbarians. In fact, Marin can completely recruit those Ruthenian barbarians. Because as long as he takes out ergotu, the other party will kneel. But the problem is that Marin needs to observe. Because he didn't know which Ruthenian was brave and barbaric enough. Therefore, he planned to send 2,000 Cossacks to the steppes of East Europe to attack those Ruthenian villages that were not under the jurisdiction of the Grand Duchy of Lithuania. When besieging those Ruthenian villages, Marin planned to let his men bring more large nets and noose that could be thrown, specifically for capturing those Ruthenian barbarians alive. Moreover, during the capture process, Marin asked them to observe carefully, select the barbarians who resisted the most fiercely, and put them into the death squad. Those who can ride horses will be incorporated into the cavalry death squad. Those who can't ride horses will be incorporated into the infantry death squad. At this time, the Ruthenians are estimated to be more than the 3.8 million officially counted, and the total number should exceed 4 million. Because many Ukrainians are unwilling to accept the rule of the Lithuanians, wandering on the steppes of East Europe, becoming Cossacks, or even wandering barbarians. And Marin's main goal is to capture those Ruthenian barbarians who are wandering alone. Then, according to their degree of barbarism, they will be incorporated into the death squad to fight. Unlike the savage death squads in the later Qing army, which were used purely to block bullets, Marin did not completely treat them as cannon fodder, but as brave barbarian pioneers. At that time, Marin would equip them with armor with sufficient protection and let them lead the charge against the enemy. As for what armor to use, Marin wanted to use plate armor. However, plate armor is too heavy, which is not conducive to fighting and charging, and it is difficult to bend down and dodge. Therefore, Marin does not plan to equip them with plate armor. Although the rhinoceros leather armor is very effective, it is too wasteful to equip a group of cannon fodder with rhinoceros leather armor. After thinking about it, Marin finally planned to learn from the 8 banners of the Qing dynasty and wear cotton armor for the death squads. Cotton armor is not very effective in protecting cold weapons, but it is very good in protecting muskets among all kinds of armor. Because cotton has the effect of delaying bullets. In addition, the iron sheet is lined inside, which has a good protective effect on muskets. Seeing that muskets have now been promoted in European countries, cavalry charges in the future will definitely encounter enemy volleys. Therefore, cotton armor, which has a good protective effect against muskets, has become a very good choice. Moreover, cotton armor also has a good protective effect against arrows. It is most suitable for charging. As long as there are enough iron sheets inside, its protective power is still very strong. What's more, Marin plans to line the cotton armor with high-strength high-carbon steel sheets instead of ordinary iron sheets, which can greatly enhance the protective ability of the cotton armor without increasing the weight and protect the safety of the death squad as much as possible. In addition, to be honest, the 8 banners armor is probably the only one that can be shown in the Qing dynasty costumes, and it is still quite handsome. Of course, the 8 banners cotton armor of the Qing dynasty was originally learned from the Ming dynasty. And their own clothes and hairstyles are too ugly. Marin plans to send 2,000 Cossacks to the Ukrainian steppes to capture tens of thousands of barbarians and rush into the army. Then, they sent people to the Ming dynasty to learn how to make cotton armor, and equipped each of them with cotton armor with sufficient protection, so that they could take the lead in charging the enemy camp. As for the style of the cotton armor, it was of course the style of the Ming army, which was close to the style of the 8 banners armor of the Qing dynasty. However, the color was not the color of the 8 banners armor, but pure black. Black was the representative color of the German region, and most of the German region was not hot, but cold in winter. The black cotton armor on the ship was not only handsome, but also very oppressive. When the army composed of tens of thousands of Ukrainian barbarians launched a charge, it would bring great psychological pressure to the enemy. What's more, they were wearing black cotton armor, and when they charged, they were like the death army from hell. Of course, if they encountered a hot summer, they still had to temporarily replace the cotton armor and wear other types of armor instead. Because wearing cotton armor in summer can easily cause people to get heatstroke. Chapter 1825 Shark skin is a hot sale in Ming dynasty. In fact, if the weather is not cold, pouring water on the cotton armor lined with iron sheets will make the bulletproof effect invincible. This is similar to the principle of covering the 8 immortals table with water during the anti-Japanese war to resist the Japanese machine guns. Of course, the Japanese machine guns during the anti-Japanese war were much more powerful than the muskets of this era. Therefore, if the cotton armor is watered, although it will become heavy, it will definitely block the lead bullets of the weak muskets of this era. But Marin will not promote the tactic of charging after watering the cotton armor. This is certainly effective, but if it is really promoted, the biggest victim may be the Beihai kingdom. Because the Beihai kingdom has the most muskets. Therefore, Marin will not promote the technology of watering the cotton armor, but let the death squad charge directly in dry cotton armor. In this way, although they will be injured by bullets, they will still be injured. However, the probability of fatality will be greatly reduced, and there is a high probability that they can be rescued. Besides, those who charge in cotton armor are all barbarians acting as death squads, so why bother about whether they are injured or not? As for the real elite of the North Sea Kingdom, Marin proposed the solution of double-layer rhino leather armor with steel plates. Double-layer rhino leather armor is already powerful in defense, and with a steel plate inserted in the middle, it is simply indestructible. Even if it is Marin himself, if he goes to the battlefield, he will only change the ordinary high-carbon steel plate to a high-manganese steel plate. As for the ordinary North Sea soldiers, they just wear shark leather armor with high-carbon steel plates inserted in it. Now, the North Sea Kingdom vigorously promotes shark fishing. While cutting the shark fins, the sharks themselves are not spared, and the shark skins are peeled off to make leather armor and scabbards. The scabbards made of shark skin are very popular commodities. The unpalatable shark meat was directly processed into feed by Marin. In this way, waste is avoided. You know, in later generations, fishing boats only cut off the shark fins and then discarded the sharks themselves when they caught sharks. In this era, marine fishing has just started, and the catch is extremely small. Often, the amount of distant water fishing in a country is not as good as the amount of fishing by several large trawlers in later generations. There is no way, these days there are almost no fishing boats that dare to go deep into the ocean. The medium-sized fishing boats of dozens of tons that Marin retired from the North Sea shipyard are considered giants among fishing boats in this era. Only fishing boats of dozens of tons dare to leave the near sea to fish in the deep sea. Ordinary fishermen small boats only dare to fish along the coastline and wait for the fishing season, and the harvest is very small. It's not that they don't know the benefits of fishing with large boats, but these poor fishermen have no money to buy large boats. Only traversers like Marin, who have money after cheating, have started a business of buying large fishing boats with loans, so that ordinary people have the possibility of buying large fishing boats. The large fishing boats use the winch-type trawl net retired by Marin, which not only greatly increases the catch, but also can catch big fish like sharks. If it were an ordinary fisherman's small boat, even if the shark was caught in the net, it would not be able to be pulled up, and the boat might be overturned by the shark. With dozens of tons of fishing boats and winches, they have the confidence to compete with the extremely powerful sharks. Moreover, catching sharks is very simple, just kill fish at sea and use the fish's blood to attract sharks. Sharks are more bloodthirsty, and as long as they smell the blood, they will rush over excitedly. As long as a strong trawl net is prepared, it is easy to catch sharks. It should be pointed out that ordinary fishing nets cannot catch sharks, and they are easily broken and escaped by powerful sharks. Only special thickened fishing nets can catch sharks. And because there are no professional shark fishing boats and fishing nets at present, sharks are now everywhere in the ocean. Except for the more ferocious killer whales, sharks have no natural enemies at all, so their number is extremely large. Even if the professional shark fishing team sent by the North Sea country has caught thousands of sharks, it is not worth mentioning for the vast ocean. Even in the large fishing ground of the North Sea fishery, the loss of thousands of sharks does not cause any waves. After all, there are many ordinary fish in the North Sea fishery, and naturally there are many sharks that eat small fish. Moreover, shark skin armor has a special advantage: waterproof. After all, it is fish skin, which is waterproof and can also prevent seawater corrosion. Shark skin armor can be used as a raincoat on rainy days. Therefore, the sailors of the North Sea Kingdom are now beginning to promote wearing shark skin armor when fighting on the deck. After all, this thing is not only rainproof and waterproof, but also has strong protective power. In fact, shark skin armor was the most popular in ancient China. There were very few sharks that could be caught in ancient China, so shark skin was very precious and was also called jiao, dragon, skin. Although it is a bit rough, it is strong enough and non-slip. Therefore, sword sheaths and knife sheaths made of shark skin were very high-end things in ancient China. Even because jiaolong is also a dragon, sharks called jiaolong skin are often made into scabbards and handles, which are high-end products that only emperors can use. Its status is much higher than any LV in later generations. For example, the sword of the great chief Qianlong is a scabbard made of shark skin. Why is the shark skin scabbard a high-end scabbard? In addition to the rumored dragon, shark skin is rough and non-slip and easy to hold. Moreover, it is relatively waterproof and corrosion resistant, and it is not easy to corrode the blade. You know, there was no stainless steel in ancient swords, so maintenance is very important. If you use other leathers, you must wipe the blade frequently to avoid rusting due to water. Moreover, other leathers are not as waterproof and corrosion resistant as shark skin. Once water penetrates and touches the blade, the precious sword will also rust, causing huge losses. Therefore, using shark skin as a scabbard is not only high-end, but also practical. In dynasties like the Qing dynasty, the hierarchy was particularly strict, and often only emperors and Manchu and Mongolian nobles could use shark skin as scabbards. If ordinary people dared to use it indiscriminately, it would be life-threatening. As for the Ming dynasty, although the hierarchy was strict, it was much more relaxed than the Qing dynasty. The only problem is that the Ming dynasty banned the sea, resulting in no large fishing boats at sea, and only a few small fishing boats secretly went to sea. And small fishing boats dare not provoke powerful sharks, so very few sharks can be caught. Even if the court did not prohibit the private ownership of shark skin scabbards, you still had to have shark skin. Of course, the Ming dynasty can be divided into two stages: one is before the Longqing opening, and the other is after the Longqing opening. Before the Longqing opening, the Ming dynasty banned the sea, so shark skin was rare and expensive. After the Longqing opening, fishing boats went out to sea, and European and Japanese merchants exchanged worthless shark skin with the Ming people, and then the price of shark skin plummeted. During the Wanli period, a piece of shark skin even fell to 100 or 200 coins, not even as good as cowhide. But the Longqing opening was in 1567, and it was only 1515 at this time. The Ming dynasty was still closed to foreign countries and banned the sea. Even the Japanese trade route had not yet been opened up by the sea merchant Wang Ji, so there was basically no cheap Japanese shark skin flowing in. Therefore, at this time, shark skin was still a rare thing. For example, when Marin asked Conti to send a message to the Ming dynasty to warn the Ming dynasty, he sent 500 shark skins for trial sales. As a result, the Ming dynasty, where shark skin was rarely seen due to the ban on sea trade, directly offered a high price of 1 tael of silver for a shark skin. Perhaps, in Europe where prices are high, 1 tael of silver for a shark skin is not very high. However, in the Ming dynasty, where prices are very low, this is a very high price. You know, 1 tael of silver can buy 2 stone of rice in the Ming dynasty. In the North Sea Kingdom, 1 tael of silver is 37.3 grams of silver, which can only be used to cast 49 standard pfennig silver coins. Including the value of copper, it is worth more than 50 pfennigs, which can only buy more than 50 pounds of rye or 10 pounds of wheat. In the Ming dynasty, sharks were mainly welcomed by officers and genii. As for the soldiers, in fact, they also want to use shark skin as a scabbard, but the economic strength does not allow it. And the officers usually collude with civil officials to drink the blood of soldiers and eat empty salaries, so they naturally have money to buy shark skin for scabbards. And genii, those officers have many ways to make money, so they naturally have money to buy shark skin for scabbards. The Ming army has millions of officers, so many. Therefore, this market is huge. And taking advantage of the shortage of shark skin in the Ming dynasty, Beihai Kingdom can still take the opportunity to make a profit. The 500 shark skins that Kong Tai used for trial sales were sold out as soon as they were delivered to the Chuanzhou wharf, and many wealthy merchants with ties to the military also placed orders and asked Beihai Kingdom to send thousands more shark skins. After all, the demand here in the Ming dynasty is too great. Whether it is the embroidered spring sword used by genii and generals, or the ordinary Yenling sword, it requires a well-made scabbard made of shark skin and used to wrap the handle. Shark skin wrapped around the handle can prevent the hand from slipping and falling out of the hand, and it is also sweat-proof. After Kong Tai saw that shark skin was selling well in the Ming dynasty, he sent a clipper to convey the news to the country. Shark skin was selling well in the Ming dynasty and was urgently needed in large quantities. Chapter 1826, Helping the Ming dynasty build a fort. However, in the Pacific Ocean, the speed from east to west is fast, while from west to east, you have to go around the latitude near Japan before you can go east with the wind. It takes a long circle, so it is much slower. Therefore, Marin cannot receive Conti's report for the time being. There is no way. There is no transoceanic wireless telegraph in this era. Marin can only wait a few months before making a decision. But with Marin's character, he will definitely not let go of this business. You know, in this era when there are no other ocean-going fishing boats on the ocean, Marin's shark fishing team may be the only fleet specially set up for shark catching. In the North Sea, which is extremely rich in fishery resources, and the Newfoundland fishing grounds, which are even richer in fishery resources, sharks are simply as numerous as cattle hair. As long as you order the construction of a few more professional shark fishing boats equipped with thickened trawls with winches, it will be too convenient to catch sharks. If you catch 10,000 sharks, peel off the shark skins, and send them to the Ming dynasty, you can exchange them for tens of thousands of taels of silver. Moreover, it is very popular. After all, there are so many greedy officers in the Ming dynasty who have Yenling knives, and the market demand is huge. Of course, only a fool would take shark skins to sell directly for money. The best way is to use shark skin to exchange for the most in-demand silk and porcelain, etc. Then, ship it back to Europe and sell it at a high price. This way, if there are 10,000 shark skins, it will not only sell for 10,000 taels of silver, but can earn tens of thousands of taels of silver or even more. The most important thing is that this thing is in short supply in the Ming dynasty. In addition, Marin is actually ready to order people to find the legendary Hawaiian Islands. When the time comes, when you find Honolulu, southeast of Oahu, you can also cut down the sandalwood all over the mountain at will. You know, in the Ming dynasty, sandalwood was also very valuable, worth more than half a tael of silver per caddy. In Honolulu, when people in later generations discovered it, there were sandalwood trees all over the mountains, which were easy to collect. Moreover, Honolulu in later generations is also an important whaling and fishing base. It is entirely possible to set up a shark fishing team again to catch sharks while cutting down sandalwood. Then, the shark skin and shark fins were sold to the Ming dynasty nearby. In fact, Marin is now preparing to sell shark fins to the Ming dynasty in large quantities. But now, it seems that the trend of eating shark fins has not yet formed in the Ming dynasty. On the contrary, shark skin was processed into a delicacy in the Song dynasty. Although shark skin is very rough, if it is processed properly and the fire is enough, it can also be made into a high-end delicacy. But the Song dynasty is different from the Ming dynasty. The Song dynasty was very open and there were many fishing boats on the sea, so there was no shortage of shark products. The Ming dynasty did not end the maritime ban until the Longqing dynasty, and shark products are still a rare thing now. According to historical records, people only noticed shark fins, that is, shark fins, in the Ming dynasty and tried to process them into delicious delicacies. It was not until the Qing dynasty that shark fins became popular and became one of the 8 delicacies of the sea. And because it is rare, it ranks very high. In other words, at present, due to the maritime ban, the Ming dynasty has obtained few sharks. Not only is shark skin scarce, but the value of shark fins has not been fully explored. Therefore, Marin plans to send people to Quanzhou, Ningbo, and Fuzhou, the three major ports where the North Sea Kingdom can dock, to open restaurants and focus on shark fins as their signature dishes. First, build a reputation, and then seek to list shark fins as tributes. When the shark fins are popular, they will be promoted vigorously. At that time, there will be no worries about selling shark fins at high prices in the Ming dynasty. As for the bear paws that are abundant in North America, this thing does not need to be promoted, because Mencius, an old man in the Warring States period of ancient China, had already said that you can't have both fish and bear paws. Therefore, bear paws can be sold directly in the Ming dynasty. However, North America is now studying how to preserve bear paws and maintain their flavor. After all, it will take at least half a year to transport bear paws to the Ming dynasty, and they will have to pass through tropical seas and high-temperature areas. They must be properly preserved to prevent the bear paws from spoiling or losing their flavor. Once there is a proper preservation method, it is time to start dumping bear paws to the Ming dynasty. At that time, as long as people are sent into the jungle with powerful powers and steel ball bullets, there will be no worries about not being able to hit bears. Even, hounds can be trained to track scents, find bears' hiding places when they hibernate, and capture them alive while they are hibernating. At this moment, a chilly wind blew through the jungles of North America. Many hibernating bears suddenly felt a chill on their paws. Fortunately, they were all hibernating and didn't notice anything wrong. Selling shark fins and bear paws has not officially started yet. As Marin's spokesperson in the Far East, Conti, the governor of Dongfan Island, has sent experts in building artillery forts to the human area at the mouth of Guangzhou to guide the Ming dynasty to build the first artillery fort as a means of preventing the invasion of Portuguese warships. In fact, there are already fortresses in Europe dedicated to placing artillery. However, artillery forts built specifically for artillery have not officially appeared. The main reason is that countries do not have heavy artillery now. Artillery forts are specially set up to place heavy artillery. In this era, only Marin's North Sea Kingdom has a large number of heavy artillery and the foundation for building artillery forts. In Europe, the current mainstream of naval guns is only the appearance of 12-pound guns. Even the 12-pound gun was the main gun of the warship, which was relatively rare. At this time, the most mainstream artillery on the Portuguese warship was actually the Franco cannon, which was a 2- or 3-pound breech-loading cannon. The Ming dynasty also learned the technology from the Portuguese warships and learned to cast the Franco cannon. It was probably not until the heavy artillery such as the Red Cannon appeared and was promoted that the construction of the forts to protect the port in Europe really began to become popular. Then, in the 17th century, Portugal brought the technology of building forts to Macau. On the Chinese side, it was not until the Qing dynasty, or even the middle and late period, that a number of forts such as Daegu Fort were established to ensure the safety of the capital. Even the famous Human Fort was urgently expanded after Lin Zexu's human destruction of opium, mainly to guard against British retaliation. Later, this batch of forts really resisted the British warships, forcing the British warships to go north along the coast to find opportunities. The Human Fort is so famous that Marin, a history student, has certainly studied it. He found that the location of the Weiyuan Fort of Human Fort was probably one of the narrowest sections of the Pearl River estuary. Setting up another fort would easily control the Pearl River estuary and block the entry and exit of enemy ships. Moreover, in the middle of the river facing the Weiyuan Fort, there are two small islands, Shanghengdang and Xiahengdang, which divide the 4.6-kilometer Pearl River estuary into two. Coincidentally, the 12-pound Napoleon cannon cast by the casting method presented by Marin, after using granular gunpowder made of rice soup, has an effective range of about 1,911 meters. Although the purity of gunpowder in the Ming dynasty was not enough, it also had an effective range of about 1,800 meters. With such a range, in order to protect the Pearl River estuary, a fort was set up in the Weiyuan Fort and Zhuangmiao village on the other side of the river in the future. Finally, the problem of the 4.6-kilometer width of the river surface was solved. If it was elsewhere, it might be easy to miss the enemy ships in the middle of the river. Because, in the middle of this section of the river is Shanghengdang Island and Xiahengdang Island. If the warships don't want to run aground, they can't go to the location of the two small islands in the middle of the river. In this way, whether they avoid the upper and lower horizontal islands to the west or avoid the upper and lower horizontal islands to the east, they will fall into the range of the 12-pound cannon. Therefore, Marin secretly instructed Conti to send the craftsman Hadover, who was responsible for the construction of the Keelung Fort, to Guangzhou to instruct the Ming army to build a fort at the location of the later Weiyuan Fort and Zhuangmiao village across the river, and deploy 12-pound Napoleon cannons, which are enough to attack and block Portuguese warships mainly equipped with François cannons. At this time, the Gama, who had just set off from Malacca port, didn't know. In the future, he will face a comprehensive blockade of the two major forts at the mouth of the Pearl River. Chapter 1827, Neutrality in Wartime. Because of the rush of time, Conti could only ask Hadover to help the Ming dynasty build two forts to block the mouth of the Pearl River. However, this was enough. For Marin, what he wanted was not for the Ming dynasty to beat Portugal, but not to be beaten by Portugal. If the Ming dynasty was completely defeated, coupled with the warlike Shunga in power, it would likely set off a wave of naval development, which Marin did not want to see. Helping the Ming dynasty build forts, this approach can suppress Portugal with firepower in the area where the forts are located. Then, let the Ming dynasty see the hope of victory. In other words, Marin hinted to the Ming dynasty in this way: if you want to defeat the Portuguese, you should overhaul the forts instead of developing the navy. As long as the two forts guarding the mouth of the Pearl River achieve good results, the Ming dynasty will be led astray by Marin and embark on the road of overhauling the forts instead of developing the navy. Besides, the cost of building forts is low and the effect is good. With the character of those famous civil officials who don't want to cause trouble, they will definitely choose to build forts in key areas instead of building warships to fight the enemy. After all, the expenses of Zheng He's treasure fleet have always made them feel uneasy. Moreover, the practice of building artillery forts is also in line with the national policy of the Ming dynasty to ban sea. In other words, the most fundamental purpose of Marin's help to build artillery forts for the Ming dynasty is not to help the Ming dynasty abuse Portugal, but to fear that the Ming dynasty will embark on the road of developing the navy because of the attack of Portugal. The Ming Empire is a real sleeping lion, not a fake lion whose backbone has been drained by slave education like the Qing dynasty. Once the Ming Empire awakens its marine consciousness, not to mention being able to participate in the world's great voyages, at least in the waters of East Asia and Southeast Asia, others will not be able to intervene. And this is not in line with Marin's strategic interests. Therefore, in order to hinder the Ming dynasty from engaging in great voyages, Marin specially offered the method of building artillery forts to help the Ming dynasty deal with Portugal with less effort, spend the least money, and get things done. Then, the future Ming dynasty will follow this example and vigorously develop coastal artillery forts. As for the warships participating in the maritime hegemony, they will naturally come to nothing. The cost difference between repairing a fort and building a warship is huge. Not to mention the cost of building a warship, the daily maintenance of the warship alone is a huge expense. You know, warships at sea need to be overhauled at any time because of shipworms. Moreover, warships are prone to run aground or sink at sea. In general, the cost of warships is huge. Moreover, the Ming dynasty currently lacks professional naval talents. Repairing a fort is different. As long as a solid fortress is built in a coastal area and cannons are installed, the waterway can be blocked to resist foreign invasions, which is very cost-effective. Moreover, this is not difficult. After all, it is just a matter of building a fortress with stones and then installing a few cannons. This is not only easy to build, but also has a good combat effect. After all, the fort is protected by stone walls and can withstand the shells of enemy warships. On the other hand, the wooden ship of the enemy ship is not as strong as the stone structure of the fort, and it is easy to be injured or even sunk. In order to make the Ming dynasty people recognize the fort, Marin took out the technology of the later fort. The method is very simple: just install a pair of cylindrical gun ears in the middle of the cannon. Then, build a stone platform with a groove for the cannon body and a transverse groove for the cylindrical gun ears. However, the groove of the cannon body is deeper, so that the cannon body can move up and down with the cylindrical gun ears as the intermediate axis. But because the gun ears are installed in the middle of the cannon body, the center of gravity of the cannon is in the rear half. All up and down angle adjustments can be completed at the tail of the cannon body. In this way, the firing angle of the cannon is no longer fixed, but can be adjusted up and down. The adjustment range given by Marin is a maximum of 30 degrees, and the minimum is naturally 0 degrees. In other words, if the tail of the cannon is completely put down, it is a 30-degree firing angle. If something is placed on the tail of the cannon body can be fired horizontally and forward. But because of gravity, the muzzle is generally slightly adjusted to a firing angle of 5 to 10 degrees to meet the needs of shooting. In addition, since it is Beihai Kingdom technology, the tail of the gun can naturally be installed with a sighting mountain for aiming, which can facilitate shooting. Although the caliber of the 12-pound gun used on the fort is a bit small, in this era, the 12-pound gun is already considered a heavy artillery. As for the Beihai Kingdom, which has larger caliber artillery, it is still kept secret and is unwilling to provide larger caliber artillery to the outside world. Under the guidance of Hadover, Ming dynasty craftsmen used stones to build two durable stone fortresses at Weiyuan Fort and Dingyuan Fort in Jiwanmiao village on the opposite bank. Weiyuan Fort was proposed by Kong Tai according to Marin's intention, and Dingyuan Fort was named by Ming dynasty officials. Then, 10 crenels were left on each side, so that the guns could be mounted and fired out. The stone platform for installing the artillery is the fixed gun mount that can adjust the up and down angles along the gun ears copied by Marin in later generations. When firing, the recoil of the artillery is transmitted to the gun ears and then to the stone platform. But the stone platform is very solid and heavy, and is basically not affected by the recoil. Therefore, after the bombardment, the gun does not need to be reset, and it can be fired continuously and fixedly. Of course, the fixed gun body has the bad consequence that the gun is difficult to load. But fortunately, the 12-pound Napoleon gun is not very large, so loading is not troublesome. Moreover, because the barrel is not long and the muzzle is still in the crenel, it is convenient for the gunners to load ammunition. In fact, 10 12-pound guns on each side are a bit few, and the power is insufficient. But fortunately, in this year, the Portuguese did not have professional warships like the galleons of the 17th century. The carracks and caravels they are using now are actually not very professional. The most important thing is that the sides of the mainstream European warships are relatively thin at present, and they have not been reinforced like later. After all, artillery battles have just become popular in this era, and everyone has not realized the need to thicken the side to prevent the side from being penetrated. The previous naval battles mainly guarded against the crossbows and catapults on the enemy's ships, so the side naturally does not need to be too thick. Only after suffering losses will Europeans choose to reinforce the side of the hull. But obviously, the Portuguese have not suffered any big losses, and they have not known how to thicken the hull. Unlike the North Sea Kingdom, because Marin is a time traveler, he has long known the trend of future naval battles and has thickened the side of the North Sea Kingdom's armed merchant ships. As for the regular warships of the North Sea Kingdom, the side is thicker and more difficult to penetrate. The forts built by Hadover for the Ming dynasty happen to be one in the east and one in the west. If the Portuguese warships wanted to cross the blockade and go north to Huangpu port in Guangzhou, they would definitely expose the side to the range of the forts. Therefore, the Portuguese suffered a loss this time. Of course, although Portugal was tricked, Marin would never admit it. Marin has already instructed Conti, once he finds that the Gama's fleet has arrived at the mouth of the Pearl River, Conti will send a ship to sincerely tell the Gama that we did not know in advance that your country was going to attack the Ming dynasty, so we have helped them build a fortress with artillery and hope that the Gama will treat it with caution. But with the arrogance of the Portuguese, plus the smooth sailing in recent years, it is estimated that they will not listen to advice. However, as long as Conti's people persuaded da Gama, and then the Portuguese suffered a great loss, it would have nothing to do with the North Sea Kingdom. If they didn't listen to the advice, what could they do? In addition, once the Ming dynasty in Portugal went to war, Conti would follow Marin's orders and declare wartime neutrality to Portugal. What is wartime neutrality? In fact, it means not helping each other. When two countries are at war, a third country that declares wartime neutrality will not support either side of the war. At the same time, the armies and warships of the warring parties will not be allowed to dock at the ports of neutral countries. Even, there will be an arms embargo on both sides of the war. In the early days of World War II, the United States condoned Japan and declared wartime neutrality and imposed an arms embargo on Japan and Chiang Kai-shek at the same time. But at that time, Japan's own industry was much more developed than China's, with a complete military industry, while Chiang Kai-shek had basically no military industry. Moreover, the United States did not stop exporting raw materials such as steel for making weapons to Japan. Therefore, people believed that the United States was actually favoring Japan at the time. In the same way, Marin asked Conti to declare wartime neutrality, which seemed to be a non-help, but the North Sea Kingdom had already handed over the casting technology of the 12-pound Napoleon cannon to the Ming dynasty, and also helped to repair the artillery platform, which had completed the weapon support for the Ming dynasty. At this time, it is meaningless to declare wartime neutrality again. Moreover, once the North Sea Kingdom engages in wartime neutrality, it means that Portugal cannot use the North Sea Kingdom's port on Taiwan Island for supplies and ship repairs. Once the Portuguese warships are damaged or insufficiently supplied, they cannot use the ports on Taiwan Island. And there are no supply ports for Portuguese allies in the surrounding areas. If you want supplies and ship repairs, you can only return to Malacca port. However, Malacca port is nearly 3,000 kilometers away from Guangzhou, and the journey is extremely long. Not allowing Portuguese warships to use the ports of Taiwan Island seems to be neutral, but in fact, the buttocks have long been crooked to the Ming dynasty. Unfortunately, even if the Portuguese knew it well, they couldn't make trouble. Because what they said makes sense. Moreover, they didn't let the Ming dynasty warships dock for supplies. Chapter 1828, The Obedient Disaster Victims. But in fact, the Ming dynasty was originally in the mainland, and there was no need to use the ports on Taiwan Island. This principle is actually aimed at Portugal. However, this principle of neutrality during wartime sounds so reasonable that you can't find any flaws. It's really shameless. Of course, you can't blame Marin for doing this. Because, in name, Dongfan Island is now a territory of the Ming dynasty. If the Portuguese warships really need to stop for repairs or replenishment, for the Ming dynasty, this is no different from collaborating with the enemy. Therefore, Marin is not afraid of Portugal's accusations. Besides, Marin and the Portuguese are not in harmony, and everyone knows it. It's just that on the surface, everyone is still abiding by the rules. If enough sailors can be recruited from England and enough warships can be built by North American shipyards, Marin wants to compete with the Portuguese at sea. However, Marin will definitely not be the first to find fault. Because there is still France watching covetously on the side, and Marin does not want to be distracted to deal with Portugal at the moment. After the threat from France is resolved, it would be good to fight Portugal and seize a gold-producing area in South Africa. At this time, France, which was feared by Marin, was also making a shocking event. 360,000 disaster victims surrounded the city of Paris. Under the instigation of the North Sea spies, more than 300,000 disaster victims in the northeast and eastern border areas of the Kingdom of France who could not repay the usury last year lost their survival after losing their land. Among them, many farmers chose to compromise and agreed to become serfs for the French nobles who lent money at high interest rates again. But there are also many French farmers who have passed the test of free life and are unwilling to become serfs for the nobles who lend money. Of course, this is not just because these farmers like freedom, but they have seen through the faces of the nobles who designed to frame them. How can people who have suffered once trust those unscrupulous nobles who give them interest on interest, usury, and repay them with steamed seeds? In other words, these French peasants who were unwilling to be serfs were not completely unwilling to be serfs, but they did not dare to be serfs for those unscrupulous nobles. Who knows what other methods those unscrupulous nobles will use to torture them in the future? Having suffered a loss once, we should try to avoid being fooled again. Only some peasants with cowardly and timid personalities chose to be serfs for those nobles who cheated people. The remaining approximately 360,000 peasants who were cheated, under the instigation of the North Sea spies, quietly left their hometowns in batches in the name of going to other places to make a living, to avoid being intercepted by the unscrupulous nobles with troops. Then, these people reunited and gradually gathered outside the city of Paris. King François I of France and his ministers were shocked and thought that these peasants were going to rebel, and they were ready to mobilize troops to suppress them. But what they did not expect was that these disaster victims gathered outside the city of Paris did not have any unruly behavior. Even none of these disaster victims entered the city of Paris, but camped and lived outside the city of Paris like the army. Then, a group of leaders were selected to enter the city in the name of petition to ask His Majesty the King for relief. Hearing that these victims were not here to rebel, but were staying outside the city in a very disciplined manner, the young François I was very happy at first, thinking that under his rule, the quality of the French people had become very high. For this, he was secretly very happy. But when Count d'Ette, an old man, told him about his concerns, François I's face finally changed. 360,000 victims. Even if each victim only consumed 0.1 pounds of food a day, 36,000 pounds of food would be consumed a day. Now is the end of the year, and it will take at least 10 months until the autumn harvest in October of the following year. Even if only 36,000 pounds of food are consumed every day, actually more than that, 10 months and 300 days will require 10.8 million pounds of food. According to the French grain price of 1.2 pfennigs per pound of rye, 10.8 million pounds of grain, worth 216,000 gold coins, would be needed. If it were a normal year, this cost would be considerable, but it would not be a burden for the powerful Kingdom of France. The problem is that France had just fought a big war between the Kingdom of Naples and Spain in Italy, and spent a lot of money and grain. Then, because of the outbreak of smallpox in the southern region, the economy of the prosperous southern coastal area collapsed, and the Paris court paid a lot of money to prevent and isolate smallpox patients in the south. All in all, the Kingdom of France's expenditure this year has long been seriously overspent, so where is the money and grain to support these victims? If it were an old king who had been in power for many years, such as Louis XII, he would probably be ready to drive away these victims, or even massacre a group of them. But the problem is that François I only ascended the throne at the beginning of the year, and his prestige was seriously insufficient. Moreover, he had never been a prince, and his foundation in the court was extremely weak. His wife, Queen Claude, had no prestige or ability, and could not help him in this matter. Of course, if these 360,000 disaster victims chose to rebel from the beginning, even if his prestige was insufficient, Francis I would be able to mobilize the country's troops to suppress and massacre these disaster victims. After all, he stood on the right side and was not afraid of being criticized. But what made Francis I want to vomit blood was that this group of disaster victims were extremely well behaved. They just gathered outside the city of Paris, neither rebelled nor disturbed the people. They just sent representatives into the city to ask Francis I to release food relief. Faced with such honest and well-behaved disaster victims, Francis I was really helpless. The other party's request was very reasonable and there was no problem at all. Moreover, when describing the crimes of the black-hearted nobles in the northeast and eastern disaster areas, the words used were very cautious. There was no inappropriate words hostile to the entire aristocracy. It was just that some lawless nobles cheated the people, which was simply impossible to find fault with. How about, Your Majesty, should we send people to instigate those disaster victims to revolt? As long as they revolt, we can deal with them. At the very least, we can drive them away. Count Duarte suggested. François I, who was at a loss, naturally accepted the suggestion, and then sent many professional spies to infiltrate the refugee camps outside Paris to incite those disaster victims to revolt. But what those professional court spies did not expect was that the refugee camps outside the city were too orderly. Under the management of the North Sea Kingdom spies, these refugee camps were like military camps, with a well-organized distribution. Each camp was also arranged with prestigious managers to avoid chaos in the refugee camps. Moreover, the disaster victims also lived in groups according to their place of origin, without random mixing. Therefore, most of the refugees in the camps knew each other. Strangers sneaking in naturally stood out. Then, not long after these imperial spies sneaked in, they were screened out by the diligent camp managers with the help of the disaster victims, who then mobilized the disaster victims to expel them. Francis I and his trusted ministers were dumbfounded. Damn, are these still disaster victims? They are harder to infiltrate than the enemy army. Chapter 1829, Angouléme's Old Servant. Of course, although the refugees abide by the rules, they will also embarrass Francois I. For example, every time a foreign envoy enters Paris, the representatives of the disaster victims will enter the city to petition at the same time, making Francois I embarrassed in front of the foreign envoys. He wanted to expel those representatives of public opinion, but they were very obedient and did not do anything irregular. It is difficult to find an excuse to expel them. Moreover, foreign envoys are also very curious about the refugees surrounding Paris, and often go out of the city to see the new things, which makes the Kingdom of France very embarrassed. Among them, the British envoys are the most diligent. Recently, it seems that in order to see the jokes of France, Edward has frequently sent envoys to Paris to cooperate with those representatives of public opinion. If the representatives who petitioned were stopped by the guards, the English envoys would deliberately intercede for them, so that the French side would not refuse well, and it would not be good not to refuse, which was very difficult to do. In fact, not all disaster victims are honest. The reason why they are so honest is that Marin's men have cleaned up those dishonest people. At the beginning, seeing hundreds of thousands of disaster victims who lost their land, there were indeed a few ambitious people who planned to imitate Robin Hood to start an uprising or something, which was better than being a leader. As for whether they would die in the future, it didn't matter. Anyway, they were almost starving to death, so they might as well be robbers and rob the nobles first, and live a life of luxury for a while. But there were too many North Sea spies mixed in this group of refugees. If they were to revolt. Marin really thought about it, but when he thought of this group of disaster victims who had no experience against the fierce French knights, it was basically a delivery, okay? Therefore, Marin directly issued a must-kill order, asking those spies to pretend to be French official spies and kill those who incited the people to revolt. Frightened by this, the disaster victims also woke up and knew that this matter was not possible. Those who were not awake were continued to be cleaned up. Along the way, a total of hundreds of militants among the disaster victims who were dishonest and wanted to rebel were killed by North Sea spies in the name of French court spies. When they arrived in Paris, no monkeys dared to jump out and make trouble. In addition, the North Sea Kingdom also sent out French-speaking spies who had served in the army to reorganize the victims, organize them into several camps according to their hometowns, and select middle-aged and elderly people with high prestige from the victims as leaders of the victims in various places. These middle-aged and elderly disaster leaders have lived for many years and are familiar with the people and things in their hometowns. In addition, after many contacts, they are familiar with the victims under their management. It is not easy for outsiders to get in. Because of this kind of fragmented management behavior similar to the Bougia system, the people sent by King Francois I of France to incite the riots were quickly found out and kicked out, which made Francois I and his ministers very helpless. So, Francois I followed the opinions of his ministers and deliberately provided only a small amount of food, so that the people could only drink thin food. After a few days, many people were starving. Francois I wanted to use this method to force these victims away and let them go to various cities to make a living. However, Marin also had a way to deal with it. He asked the spies to secretly pass through the Seine River and deliver food to the disaster victims' camp in the middle of the night. Then, mixed with the small amount of food allocated by Francois I, he cooked oatmeal porridge for the victims. In addition, in order to ensure that the leaders of various places could help appease the victims with peace of mind, Marin secretly sent people to deliver bread to the disaster victims' camp through the Seine River in the middle of the night. Then, when the leaders went to the tents in the main meeting area for a meeting, each person would receive black bread. With enough food, the leaders of the disaster victims in various places were naturally not in a hurry, and they also worked hard to help appease the victims. Although the victims were hungry and complained, the leaders had spoken, and the thorns had been killed long ago, so naturally no one would jump out. Francois I was depressed. Both of his methods were resolved by the victims, which really made him helpless. He didn't even know that someone was targeting him, thinking that the victims could tolerate it. Faced with people like Gandhi who did not resist violently, Francois I also experienced the depression of the British in later generations. You want to kill the other party? They didn't take violent measures. Although this method is despised and the effect is not so good. However, the disgusting index is definitely very high. This non-violent non-cooperation method makes people want to kill but can't find an excuse. If such a thing happened in the colonies, perhaps the means could be more intense. Anyway, everyone can't see what happened in the distant colonies. However, if this happened in the capital, it would be very disgusting. The capital is generally known as the best place, although it is bragging, but it is indeed the face of a country. There were hundreds of thousands of disaster victims surrounding the city in Paris. If there were hot searches in this era, it would definitely be ranked first in the hot searches, which made François I lose face. In desperation, François I had to find a way to solve the problem. It happened that he was going to build several inland shipyards and needed a large number of craftsmen. As a result, all the farmers who were not very old and had carpentry skills among the disaster victims were recruited, and there were thousands of people. But most of the remaining people had no skills, so the French court naturally looked down on them. And the thousands of carpenters also took their families away, a total of about 16,000 people left. However, this is also the limit. After all, due to the impact of war and smallpox, the French court had huge expenses and even deficits. Therefore, there is not so much money to resettle the victims. Being able to arrange thousands of carpenters is already the limit of the French royal family. This is because the French royal family can levy taxes on the French church. Just when François I and his courtiers were having a headache for the more than 300,000 observant victims around Paris, John Lafitte, one of the ministers trusted by François I, was secretly doing one thing: deceiving people. In a large French restaurant in Paris, John Lafitte was entertaining Baron Boger, a close confidant of François I. Although Baron Boger had a humble identity and average IQ, he had an identity that people valued: an old minister of Angoulême. The so-called old ministers of Angoulême refer to the ministers of Francis I when he was the Count of Angoulême before he became the King of France. Of course, he was awarded the title of Duke of Valois when he was 4 years old, becoming the first heir to the Kingdom of France. But the Duke of Valois is just a title, and he has no actual fiefdom. Moreover, people at that time did not know whether Louis XII could leave a male heir, so they would not really regard him as the crown prince, but only as a spare tire for the crown prince at most. Therefore, the real identity of Francis I at that time was the Grand Lord of the Earldom of Angoulême in the Charente region. And his old ministers in the Earldom of Angoulême are called Old Ministers of Angoulême, and they are also the most trusted group of Francis I after he ascended the throne. Chapter 1830, A Clever Deception. This Baron Beaucourt was not an outstanding figure in the Earldom of Angoulême. He was just a little stronger in military force and was an important officer in the court of the Earldom of Angoulême at that time. If it were just the above identities, then this Baron Beaucourt would not be worth mentioning. His identity that really makes people pay attention is that he was once the swordsmanship teacher and writing teacher of Francis I when he was a teenager. Although after François I married Princess Claude, he changed to a more senior swordsmanship teacher and writing teacher. However, those newly replaced high-end swordsmanship teachers and writing teachers were arranged by Queen Anne, now Queen Mother Anne, and were not François I's own people. What François I really believed in were those old ministers of Angoulême who had followed him from the beginning. After all, whether he was king or not, those people were his loyal subordinates. Although Baron Beaucourt was not smart enough and his martial arts were nothing compared to the French court knights, he had always been the most important guard leader of the Earldom of Angoulême, responsible for the security of the city of Angoulême. When Francis I became the King of France, he naturally had to bring his confidants to Paris to assist him. If it weren't for Baron Beaucourt's average ability, it is estimated that Francis I would have handed over the security work of the Paris defense to him. But even if he did not become the commander of the Paris Defense Army, Baron Beaucourt, who was loyal to Francis I, still got the important task of commander of the Palace Guard. It can be said that he was the person in charge of the last line of defense for Francis I. Because of his long-term guarding of the court, although Baron Beaucourt's status was not too high, he could often accompany Francis I and chat with him at any time. And Francis I also liked to chat with this loyal old minister of Angoulême about the past and recall the childhood fun of the city of Angoulême. Therefore, although Baron Boger was not in a high position, no one in France dared to look down on him. There were countless people who wanted to win him over, not to mention John Lafitte. John Lafitte invited him to drink, which was not noticeable at all, because many people did so. But this Baron Boger was a bit unscrupulous. He loved drinking and food. However, his mouth was very tight. You invited him to drink and eat meat, and he would eat and drink as usual. However, it would be extremely difficult for you to get news from him. It was precisely because of this characteristic that François I trusted him so much. After all, no monarch wanted his security chief to be a big mouth. Only those who could keep secrets could easily gain the trust of the superiors. However, this time the situation was very different. Because John Lafitte had never thought of asking him about the royal secrets, but planned to fool him. In order to clear his suspicion, John Lafitte, under the guidance of Marin, never spoke to Baron Boger himself to express his views, but let others do it for him. Of course, in order to conceal his true purpose, when John Lafitte first entertained Baron Boger, he always pretended to inquire about the various hobbies and tendencies of the new king, François I. And this is what everyone who entertained Baron Boger did. But this Baron Boger is very interesting. He is the kind of person who eats the sugar-coated bullet and throws the bullet back when faced with a sugar-coated bullet. Every time someone invites him to drink and eat meat, if he is free and the other party's status is not very low, he will generally go there happily. But when he gets there, he buries his head in eating and drinking. He just laughs and confuses the host's inquiries, and then continues to eat and drink. Despite this, there is still an endless stream of people inviting him to the banquet. Because Baron Boger is one of the few people in the entire Kingdom of France who can chat with the king frequently. Even if you can't get any useful information from this guy, if you serve this guy well, when you chat with the king one day, he can say a few good words for you, which is considered a profit. So, like others, John Lafitte started the regular, inviting for food and drinks, mode after the previous failures of exploring the royal secrets, and no longer asked questions. Moreover, John Lafitte always brought different friends to accompany him and flatter Baron Bocourt. Some of these friends of John Lafitte were small nobles, and some were simply businessmen, known as John Lafitte's business partners. Baron Bocourt did not feel slighted by John Lafitte's bringing businessmen to accompany him. Because he only had fine wine and food in his eyes and ignored everything else. Moreover, it was quite comfortable to hear these low-status businessmen flattering. Why did Baron Bocourt give John Lafitte face? In addition to John Lafitte's status being sufficient and being a new member of the circle of François I's favorites, face had to be given. In addition, John Lafitte was the owner of a winery. The barrel-brewed high-end Lafitte wine produced by Lafitte Winery was also a favorite of Baron Bocourt. Then, John Lafitte was able to invite one of the now extremely famous French royal chefs, the Fat brothers, to help cook for him. You know, although he was a spy who sneaked into the palace, Marin let the Fat brothers learn too many advanced cooking skills in order to let them gain a foothold in the French court. In this era when French cuisine has not yet become popular, the Fat brothers are the leaders of the French culinary world. Even the French cuisine that is now popular came from the two Fat brothers. These two guys are also respected by the French as the ancestors of French cuisine. Why did Baron Boger refuse to invite such a master-level French chef to cook? You know, these two people usually only cook for the king's family. Even he, the commander of the palace guard, is not qualified to eat the dishes made by the Fat brothers. John Lafitte could invite one of them to come to support him, and this opportunity should not be missed. But Baron Boger didn't know at all that John Lafitte and the Fat brother were colleagues in the North Sea Intelligence Bureau, so they naturally had to give him face. To the outside world, the Fat brother gave John Lafitte face because they liked the top wines of Lafitte Winery. But in fact, the two of them loved to drink strong liquors such as rye ergotu produced in the North Sea. Of course, those are not important. What's important is that the Fat brother came to cook, and Baron Boger was willing to come. And John Lafitte, under Marin's guidance, was extremely cunning. Marin didn't let John Lafitte speak himself, but asked the businessmen invited by John Lafitte to accompany him to speak in the form of chatting. The specific method is that when the wine is halfway through, when they see Baron Boger concentrating on eating and drinking, the businessmen invited by John Lafitte will temporarily stop flattering and chat with each other instead. And the content of their chat will naturally reach the ears of Baron Boger at the same table. After many times, it will form a subtle influence, and Baron Boger will not worry about not remembering it. Then, when he chats with François I one day, he may remember it and tell François I casually. This method seems to have a low probability, but it actually has a high chance of success. Because Baron Boger is a loyal minister of François I. As a loyal minister, he naturally hopes that everything goes well for his monarch. Now that the victims are besieging the city, François I is also in a state of panic. If Baron Boger hears any feasible suggestions, when he sees François I worried about it one day, he will involuntarily say it out, hoping to help his master solve his problems. The merchants that John Lafitte brought to accompany him for drinks were actually spies from the North Sea. What they said at the banquet was all rehearsed in advance. Moreover, they took advantage of the time when Baron Boger was half drunk and immersed in eating and drinking to talk loudly about some important things. For example, now, the issue of disaster victims has become the hottest topic in Paris. The North Sea spies who came to pretend to be businessmen to accompany him for drinks would talk about it. However, they did not say any useful information in the first few times. Until recently, François I was increasingly troubled by the issue of disaster victims. John Lafitte found the right opportunity and signaled the North Sea spies who pretended to be John Lafitte's business partners at the banquet to talk about this topic in a targeted manner, and also provided a solution. Chapter 1831 Acting. Just as Baron Boger was busy dealing with a large pork elbow, John Lafitte gave a look and the two merchants, who were responsible for warming up the scene, immediately started talking. Recently, I'm planning to ship a batch of Bordeaux wine to the North Sea Kingdom to sell. The North Sea Kingdom is relatively wealthy, and it is said that all the nobles there can eat white bread made of wheat flour for every meal. Moreover, it is the kind that is touched with butter and honey. Boasted a North Sea spy who went by the alias Giroux. At this time, another North Sea spy who used the alias Trezeguet immediately responded, "Well, I have heard about the wealth of the North Sea. It is said that since they seized the Duchy of Brunswick-Wolfenbüttel and the Duchy of Brunswick-Lüneburg, and held the silver city of Goslar and the salt city of Lüneburg, the North Sea is now extremely rich. High-end things like Bordeaux red wine are quite popular there. For example, Lord John's Lafite red wine is a very popular high-end product in the North Sea." After saying that, Trezeguet smiled at John Lafite in a flattering manner, which was in line with his identity as an aristocratic hanger-on. Then, a young North Sea spy named Griezmann interrupted, "You too, I know that the North Sea is rich. But the problem is that because of the smallpox problem, the Grand Duke Marin of the North Sea has announced a border blockade and banned foreigners from entering. Even if you two have good goods, it's hard for them to enter." The merchant named Giroux said disdainfully, "What do you know? Little brother, the smallpox has subsided, and it was the cowpox method invented by Grand Duke Marin himself that solved the problem. Today, although the North Sea is still under martial law at the border and is still promoting cowpox cultivation, foreign trade ports such as Emden have begun to open up to the outside world. I only need to ship the goods to Emden port and find a North Sea merchant to take over, and I can make a fortune. Right now, the smallpox issue has just passed. In the past few months, it is estimated that the high-end wines in the North Sea have been out of stock for a long time, and there must be a market for them." Trezeguet nodded repeatedly and agreed, "That's right. Trade has been interrupted for a long time in the past few months due to smallpox. The nobles of the North Sea Kingdom must have not been able to drink high-end wine for a long time. This time, brothers Giroux will definitely make a fortune. It's all God's blessing." Giroux said modestly. Of course, the above are all preparations. The real topic was thrown out after a long period of nonsense. "Tell me, why did these hundreds of thousands of victims surround Paris but not enter the city to make trouble? It feels so weird. I heard that in the Duchy of Württemberg in Germany, the peasants launched a rebellion and went against the Duke of Württemberg. Why are these victims so honest?" The young Griezmann asked puzzledly. The older Trezeguet shook his head and said, "Isn't this simple? Because rebellion has no good end. You have also heard that whether it is the rebellious peasants in Württemberg or the mobs in Hungary, they were finally suppressed by the nobles. Now, those rebellious mobs have been sold to the Grand Duke Marin of the North Sea by the monarchs of the two countries and sent to the wild continent to cut trees and reclaim wasteland. Therefore, as long as you are not stupid, you will not rebel randomly. Moreover, the knights of my great France are powerful, which is not comparable to the useless small country of Württemberg. As long as those disaster victims dare to rebel, they will be destroyed by the brave French knights at the first time. And the end of daring to rebel is to be ruthlessly killed by the knights. As long as you are not stupid, you dare not do that." At this time, Baron Boger, who was gnawing on the braised pork elbow, paused, glanced at Trezeguet, and then continued to gnawing on the braised pork elbow. The general has a big appetite, and this is the second braised pork elbow he has gnawed. Seeing that they had attracted the attention of Baron Boger, the three spies were overjoyed. At this time, the spy with the alias Giroux suddenly said, "I suddenly have an idea that may solve the problem of disaster victims." Then, the attention of others was attracted. Even Baron Boger, who was chewing on the pork elbow, stopped chewing on the pork elbow and pricked up his ears to listen to what Giroux had to say. Giroux pretended to be a mysterious master and said, "Since the royal family can no longer afford the more than 300,000 disaster victims outside the city, and it has seriously affected the external image of the Kingdom of France, then why don't we learn from the prodigal son Ulrich, Duke of Württemberg, and sell these more than 300,000 disaster victims to Grand Duke Marin of the North Sea? Do you know? The first time the Duchy of Württemberg suppressed the rebels, it captured 27,000 rioters, and then bought 26,000 rioters and their families from Marin in exchange for 780,000 golden gold coins. Including the second batch of rioters captured later, a total of 30,000 to 40,000 rioters were used to exchange for more than 1 million gold coins from Grand Duke Marin. Not only did it pay off the huge debt of 1 million gold coins that Duke Ulrich owed, but it also had a lot of surplus, making Duke Ulrich rich." Then, Trezeguet turned into a supporting actor and added, "Not only that, I heard that Hungary also sold 67,800 prisoners of war to Archduke Marin. The price was not as high as 30 gold coins per household in Württemberg, but it was 20 golden gold coins per household, with a total price of more than 1.1 million gold coins, which is equivalent to the annual fiscal revenue of the Kingdom of France." Baron Boger had put down the half-eaten elbow and began to listen to their bragging attentively. And the young Griezmann asked curiously, "Oh my God. Buying so many people not only costs more than 2 million gold coins, but also has to bear their food. Where does Archduke Marin of the North Sea get so much money and food?" Giroux explained, "Grand Duke Marin does not have that much money. He borrowed money from the Fugger family, the richest family in Germany. You know, it is said that the Fugger family has assets worth millions of gold coins, so it is no problem to lend Grand Duke Marin 2 million. Moreover, Grand Duke Marin has obtained the large silver mine in Goslar and has the ability to repay. As for the food to feed these hundreds of thousands of prisoners of war, it is said that the North Sea Kingdom has a secret technique and a high grain yield. Perhaps it can feed the hundreds of thousands of disaster victims. I don't know if this is true or false. At this time, Baron Boger's eyes flashed. As a close minister of the king, he certainly knew the secret technique of the North Sea Kingdom's high grain yield. It was volcanic ash. Moreover, it seemed that it was offered by Viscount John Lafitte in front of him. So, he looked at John Lafitte meaningfully. John Lafitte pretended not to see it and lowered his head to drink. At this time, the best right-hand man, Griezmann, stood up again. Hey, this is a good idea. If His Majesty the King sells all the 300,000 disaster victims outside the city to the Grand Duke Marin of the North Sea, he can also exchange for millions of gold coins. In this way, not only will His Majesty the King not have to bear the burden of food for these 300,000 disaster victims, but he can also exchange for nearly a year's national fiscal revenue. Moreover, there will be military expenses for the war with the Spaniards next year. Baron Boger was shocked when he heard this, and almost dropped the wine glass in his hand. Although he is not smart, he has heard a lot of big shots talking about big things, so he understands a little. What this Griezmann said is not false at all. If these disaster victims who have lost their land can be sold to Marin, not only can this heavy burden be thrown away, but also millions of gold coins can be exchanged for the royal family, greatly increasing the chances of defeating Spain. But at this time, to his surprise, John Lafitte, the owner, expressed a different point of view. What nonsense are you talking about? It's not as simple as you think. Selling the victims to the North Sea Kingdom can indeed make a lot of money, and you can also get rid of the package. But have you ever thought about the face of His Majesty the King? Selling so many people to foreigners will affect His Majesty's reputation. Baron Boger's eyes dimmed immediately. Yes, selling people can get rid of burdens and make a lot of money. However, this is not good for the reputation of King Francois I, and it is easy to be criticized. As a die-hard fan of His Majesty the King, how could Baron Boger be willing to damage his master's reputation? But at this time, the young businessman Griezmann, who had been acting as a supporting actor, retorted, "My Lord Viscount, I don't think this is difficult." "Not difficult? How do you say?" "His Majesty the King's face is the top priority." John Lafitte glared at Griezmann in anger. Chapter 1832. The plot succeeds. After hearing John Lafitte's words, Baron Boger looked at him with admiration. Although John Lafitte's status was higher, in the eyes of Baron Boger, a close minister of the king, he was the king's own man. John Lafitte, who came to seek refuge later, was an outsider and was not that reliable. Now, seeing that John Lafitte, an outsider, was always thinking about His Majesty the King, Baron Boger was very pleased. But the young Griezmann was not convinced and said, "My Lord Viscount, I really have a way. Not only can I make this money, but also let His Majesty not lose face." John Lafitte ignored him and glared at him. But Baron Boger suddenly said, "Young man, tell us what you think, we will listen to it." Griezmann bent down and said respectfully, "Yes, Lord Boger." Then he cleared his throat and said, "What the Viscount is worried about is nothing more than the king betraying his own people, which is not a good reputation. Therefore, His Majesty must not be allowed to come forward in this matter. Therefore, I think that a temporary office for managing refugees can be established to be responsible for the management of refugees and selling." John Lafitte looked livid and said gloomily, "Are you looking for a scapegoat? Do you know that no matter who is responsible for this, his reputation will be infamous for thousands of years? At that time, the descendants of this noble family will be ashamed." John Lafitte was right. Leading the sale of hundreds of thousands of citizens to foreign countries, this matter will be infamous for thousands of years. And European nobles attach great importance to honor. If this is done, this noble family will be finished. Griezmann said nonchalantly, "That's true, but what about the noble family that is destined to be extinct? For example, Baron Adair, whom we often see in the casinos in Paris. Baron Adair is a famous prodigal in Paris. His parents died early and he has no brothers or sisters. Even within several generations, he has no close relatives. The worst thing is that he has no children. It is said that when he was young, he was injured on the battlefield and could not have children, and he even lost interest in women. Then, without hope, he began to indulge in eating, drinking and having fun, and became addicted to gambling. Later, because of gambling, he lost the huge baronial territory and only had a small village left. And the amazing thing is that because he lost too much, this guy's gambling skills have also improved. Later, although he failed to turn the tables in the casino, he also had losses and wins, and he didn't lose the last village. However, his behavior was obviously considered a shame among the nobles. Therefore, there was no noble who was willing to associate with him. But this guy didn't care about his face anymore, and he spent all day in the casino, unable to extricate himself. Griezmann's meaning is very simple, that is, to let this shameless baron take the blame and take the blame on himself. Anyway, this guy is already shameless. Afterwards, at most he can be given some financial compensation. Even giving him a few gambling houses is no problem. Baron Boger's eyes lit up immediately, and he asked, how to do it specifically. Griezmann thought for a moment, and said, I don't understand this either, but it's nothing more than setting up a trap to make Baron Adair lose all his property and make him owe a huge debt. Then, secretly send someone to find him and let him take the blame. In addition, we can't sell people at a price, which has a bad impact. However, we can acquiesce to the North Sea Kingdom to send people to recruit disaster victims. But afterwards, those recruited disaster victims want to leave Paris, and Baron Adair, who is responsible for managing the disaster victims, can charge them 20 to 30 gold coins per household as a management fee, otherwise he won't let them go. Moreover, the money must be collected in private, and then quietly handed over to His Majesty. Paper and pen. After listening to Griezmann's suggestion, Baron Boger was very excited and asked John Lafitte for paper and pen directly. He wanted to write down this good idea. After all, he is a warrior with a bad memory, so it is safest to write it down. John Lafitte pretended to be helpless and asked someone to bring paper and pen. When handing it to Baron Boger, John Lafitte pretended to be reluctant and said, Lord Boger, I always feel that this matter is not very reliable. Would you like to consider it again? But in fact, John Lafitte was already very happy in his heart. The reason why he pretended to stop it was actually to clear his suspicion. There were people present who testified that he was against this matter. In the future, even if there is a problem, no one can blame him. Baron Boger said casually, Your Majesty has been troubled by the refugee issue for a long time. Although I don't know whether this method is reliable or not, it is also good to send it to Your Majesty for reference. Well, if it is adopted by Your Majesty, you will have made a contribution. Maybe, you will have a noble title. After that, he smiled at that person, Griezmann. Griezmann seemed to be stimulated and looked overjoyed. He bowed to Baron Boger and said, Master Boger cultivates me more. Speaking of which, Master John has always been my idol. After that, he looked at John Lafitte meaningfully, and John Lafitte looked annoyed. Baron Boger suddenly realized that John Lafitte was a German businessman from the bishopric of Munster. He was appreciated by the previous French King Louis XII for his useful strategies. He was first promoted to Baron, and later promoted to Viscount because of his military exploits. Obviously, the young man named Griezmann also wanted to copy John Lafitte's success. However, as a senior, John Lafitte didn't seem to be very happy. Yes, anyone who saw a competitor would not be happy. This kind of minister who relies on the emperor's appreciation cares most about the monarch's favor. But the monarch's favor is limited. If there is one more person to share, there will be one less favor. Who would be happy? Baron Boger, who thought he was familiar with the palace struggles, imagined the grievances between John Lafitte and the young wealthy businessman named Griezmann. If it were made into a TV series, it would probably be broadcast on the 8 o'clock prime time. Baron Boger didn't care about the grievances between John Lafitte, the pioneer, and Griezmann, the latecomer. In his opinion, as long as it was beneficial to His Majesty the King to whom he was loyal, what was the harm in having more such capable and wise men? Anyway, they all make a living by brains, and there was no conflict with people like him who made a living by force. After writing down Griezmann's suggestions, Baron Boger hurried to the palace with a small notebook in which he wrote down the suggestions. But he didn't know that after he left, John Lafitte and Griezmann, the pioneer and latecomer, smiled at each other, and at the same time revealed a cunning smile of, the conspiracy succeeded. Chapter 1833, Let's be clear. When Baron Boger returned to the palace, François I had already gone to bed early. François I was only 21 years old, and he was young and energetic. Queen Claude was also young and beautiful, and in her prime. Although François I was secretly sterilized by Marin, he didn't know it. In addition, sterilization does not affect the relationship between husband and wife, so he was unaware of it and continued to be intimate with the young queen, who was only 16 years old. It was only 7 or 8 o'clock in the evening, and the two of them rested early. And for the monarch of a country, creating an heir is also a top priority. Therefore, even if Baron Boger was eager to offer advice, he could only wait until the next day. After all, he was not a eunuch and could not break into the king's bedroom at will. The next morning, it was more than 8 o'clock in the morning, and François I, who was overworked last night, got up slowly and went to the restaurant for breakfast. Breakfast was also made by the fat brother. It was a very delicious bacon pizza with 2 eggs. In addition, there was a large cup of hot milk. Because François I had been sterilized long ago, Marin didn't need to let the fat brother tamper with the food. But it was still necessary for the fat brother to stay in the Paris court, so Marin asked the fat brother to stay there to get information while asking them to cook for the king's family, including Queen and who moved to the side hall. Of course, the head of the palace guards like Baron Boger didn't have that qualification. But as long as he was thick-skinned, Baron Bogart could often come to eat and drink. For example, when making breakfast, the fat brother often made a few more backups. Baron Bogart took this opportunity to take a backup bacon pizza and gnawed it while standing aside. Francois I didn't care about this. Because he and Queen Claude didn't eat much, and Queen Anne's breakfast had been specially delivered. In fact, these spare bacon pizzas were given to the maids in the end, but usually after the king and queen had finished eating. If the close confidants like Bogart were willing to wait, they could also share. Of course, sometimes, Bogart could also take a spare breakfast to enjoy before the king and queen finished eating. After all, the king and queen could not finish it, and leaving a spare was just a rule, in case the king suddenly had a big appetite. Baron Bogart's mouth was full of oil as he chewed on the pizza full of excellent bacon fried in olive oil. After eating, Bogart wiped his hands with a towel, and then took out the small notebook with the method recorded in his pocket. Francois I looked at the method recorded in the small notebook and fell into deep thought, and didn't even notice that the half-eaten bacon pizza in his hand had cooled down. Your Majesty, do you think this method is useful? Baron Bogart asked hopefully. After thinking for a while, Francis I said, in theory, it is a good idea. However, I always feel that something is wrong. How about this, you go and rule, and ask Duke Charles, Duke of Bourbon, Count Duarte, Viscount John and others to come, and we will discuss this matter together. 2 hours later, all the close ministers of Francis I came to the meeting room of the palace to participate in the discussion. Your Majesty, why did you summon us here? Charles III, the most senior Duke of Bourbon, asked first. Francis I did not answer, but handed the little book of Bogart to Duke Charles and asked them to pass it around. After everyone had seen it, Francois I asked, my lords, how about this method? Can it solve the current dilemma in Paris? Duke Charles frowned and said nothing. Count Duarte, as the old leader on the secret front, expressed his concerns, Your Majesty, this method is naturally good. However, there is one thing that needs to be noted, the news must not be leaked. Once the secret is leaked, Your Majesty's reputation will be ruined. Therefore, although this plan is good, the first thing to do is to keep it absolutely confidential and not leak it. Francois I also suddenly realized at this time, I was wondering why I felt something was wrong. It turns out that I felt there was such an omission. At this time, John Lafayette, who was involved, said calmly, there is no problem in keeping it secret. Only Baron Bogart, Louis, Edu and the 3 merchants were present. Lord Bogart and I need not talk about it. Louis and Edu are also nobles. We can just give them a silence order. As for the 3 merchants, I will send someone tonight to make them shut up forever. The so-called shut up forever naturally means to let them die. Although this matter is a bit unkind, it is actually nothing for the sake of the king's reputation. But the young man who offered the advice seems to have some talent. Isn't it a pity to deal with it like this? Baron Bogart hesitated. He still had high hopes for Griezmann. John Lafayette shook his head and said, Lord Bogart, if it is normal, his skills are indeed worthy of praise. However, you should know that if this matter is leaked, it will have a great impact on Your Majesty's reputation. Compared with Your Majesty's reputation, his little cleverness is not worth mentioning. At this point, Francois I and several other nobles nodded. Anyway, they are just 3 merchants, so it's really not a pity. But I'm worried that the 3 of them will talk nonsense to others and leak the plan. Duke of Bourbon Charles III said worriedly. John Lafayette pretended to think about it, and then said, it should be fine. This happened last night and it shouldn't have had time to spread. The 3 of them are currently living in one of my villas and are being treated as guests. I will send someone to hold them back and prevent them from going out and talking nonsense to others. Then, tonight. Everyone nodded, thinking that this approach was reliable. But John Lafayette hesitated and said, Your Majesty, do you want to reconsider it? This matter is too big, and it will be a disaster if it is leaked. If I don't use this method, I don't have to deal with the 3 of them. After saying that, he showed a reluctant expression, and seemed reluctant to kill his 3 friends. Francois I waved his hands and said, I don't want to do this either, but, Viscount John, you have to know how bad the impact of more than 300,000 disaster victims surrounding Paris is. If it continues, not only will the court bear a heavy burden, but the entire kingdom of France will also be ashamed. After all, it is a shame for the capital to be surrounded by more than 300,000 hungry people. Moreover, I am also afraid that after a long time, these people will really cause trouble and make outsiders laugh at them. Francois I has been on the throne for less than a year, and his ideas and methods are still immature, and his prestige is also insufficient. When he suddenly encountered this incident, he panicked and just wanted to solve the trouble as soon as possible. As for the consequences, he couldn't care so much. John Lafayette made a hesitant expression, and then said, in fact, Your Majesty, the reason why I am worried is because I have thought of a problem, a very serious problem. What problem? Hearing, serious, Francois I was also a little nervous. John Lafayette continued, source of soldiers. Your Majesty, among these 300,000 disaster victims, there are more than 60,000 able-bodied men. Among them, there are even people who have been mercenaries and conscripts. If we just give them to the Grand Duke Marin of the North Sea, maybe these people with military experience will be recruited by him to serve as soldiers. At this point, Francois I and others all changed their expressions. In fact, Marin deliberately asked John Lafitte to say this. The more John Lafitte opposed and pointed out problems, the clearer his relationship with Marin would appear. Even if something went wrong one day, he would not be implicated. After all, he had disagreed before and raised many questions, so no one would doubt him. In addition, this approach of saying ugly things in advance could dispel the doubts of the French side as much as possible to avoid future troubles. Chapter 1834 Waiting for the other party to come. Hurry up and check how many of the more than 60,000 disaster victims have served in the military. Francois I ordered solemnly. Although he had no grudge against the North Sea Kingdom, he was also very wary of this big mercenary leader who had once made the previous king of France look humiliated. It was not a wise move to send excellent soldiers to such a person who might become an enemy. Baron Boger quickly sent people to investigate, and there would be no data for a while. John Lafitte was waiting calmly. As a spy for the North Sea Kingdom, he actually knew the data. Among the more than 60,000 disaster victims, more than 3,600 people had served as mercenaries or conscripts of noble territories. Although after he reminded them, these more than 3,000 people with military experience must be left behind, but the North Sea Kingdom would not feel sorry. Because when the North Sea Kingdom selected soldiers, it would deliberately not select those who had military experience. Because these people were infected with the habits of the old army, it was difficult to reform, so it was better to select farmers with no military experience to train. Moreover, Marin only wants labor for farming, not soldiers, and does not need to select soldiers from the more than 60,000 French men. Besides, Marin is not confident that these French people have military power. After all, they are not of our race. Therefore, this time, John Lafitte deliberately raised this issue, not only to reassure the French side, but also to reassure Marin. After all, if these men with military experience have ideas that they should not have in the colonies and take the lead in an uprising, it will be a lot of fun. In the afternoon, the minister in charge of civil affairs sent data among the more than 60,000 disaster victims. 3,651 people have participated in mercenaries or noble territorial armies and have war experience. Francois I immediately ordered this part of the people to be eliminated and simply incorporated into the French infantry's vassal army, that is, the transport brigade responsible for escorting food or serving the knights. Then, the next one is the one who is willing to give it to Marin. But everyone argued for a long time about how to contact Marin. Finally, Francois I made the decision, first designed to bankrupt Baron Adair, the famous prodigal son of Paris, and then send someone to remind him to find connections to seek an official position. Then, the position of the head of the temporary government office that manages the victims will fall on him. At that time, send someone to contact him secretly, and he will send someone to contact Marin to agree to his recruitment of victims and ask for benefits. Of course, Francois I will definitely not show up for this matter. There will be a trustworthy minister responsible for contacting Baron Adair and asking him to handle this matter. Even if he takes money, it is the minister who takes it and then secretly gives it to Francois I. In short, Francois I must get out of this matter. Even if someone talks about this matter later, it will not implicate Francois I. After arranging this matter, today's meeting is over. John Lafitte also received a task, to make the three businessmen Giroux, Trezeguet, and Griezmann get their lunch boxes. When walking out of the palace meeting room, Baron Boger said to John Lafitte in a gloomy tone, "Lord John, why are you in a hurry to get rid of the little guy, Griezmann? Don't you think he is very similar to you at the beginning? I am looking forward to him growing up to be the second you." These words were implicitly accusing John Lafitte of being intolerant. Several other people also looked over, but most of them were laughing at John Lafitte. After all, John Lafitte was a lucky minister who came in later, and he was not the same kind of person as them. Even Count Duarte, who was also a lucky minister, was an old French aristocrat, unlike John Lafitte, an outsider from Germany. John Lafitte was a strictly trained spy. How could he be easily influenced? He looked at Baron Boger with clear eyes and said, "What are you talking about? Lord Boger, we are all loyal subordinates of His Majesty, and everything is for His Majesty's sake. Do you want to see His Majesty's reputation ruined because of the leak?" Having said that, Baron Boger could only walk away angrily. After all, he is a die-hard fan of the king, and he can't bear to see the king's reputation damaged. "I just stabbed John Lafitte because I was a little unhappy with him, and I felt sorry for the death of a smart guy." That night, John Lafitte's remote villa in Paris suddenly caught fire. Then, when people cleaned up the scorched ruins the next day, they found 8 charred bodies, including 5 maids. 3 of the charred bodies looked very much like the 3 guests of Viscount John Lafitte. Moreover, they were found in a guest room where they were staying. Baron Boger, as the king's confidant, sent his capable men to investigate, mainly to confirm whether the 3 people were really dead. The people sent by Baron Boger were the guards who accompanied him to the banquet last night. Although they did not sit at the table, they had seen the three people. After returning, he reported to Baron Boger, the bodies were all burnt black, but according to their respective body shapes and heights, they can all match. But they didn't know that from the beginning, the North Sea Spy Department had made perfect preparations. Even the stand-ins of the three spies were found in the slums of Paris. At this time, there were more than 100,000 people in Paris. The slums in the city were also home to a large number of poor people and beggars. The spies of the North Sea had already found 3 stand-ins with similar heights and body shapes to the spies. On the night of the action, the 3 stand-ins were drunk and sent to the guest room where the 3 were. Moreover, grease was specially applied on their faces. So, after the fire, because the grease is flammable, their faces were burned first, and no ghost could recognize them. This was because the fire was put out later, otherwise even their bodies would be burned. So, when Baron Boger's people came to identify them the next day, they could not see their appearance at all, and could only identify their body shape and height based on the charred bodies. And these, the spies had already thought of, and naturally got people of the same size, without any flaws. After the silence was done, the next step was to guide Baron Adair into the game. For this reason, François I specially sent people to collect several cheating gambling masters, and concentrated on training them for a period of time, specifically training them to cooperate with the matters of pitting people. When they have practiced cooperation, they will be sent to the gambling houses where Baron Adair often hangs out, set traps for the other party, and make him bankrupt, with no way out. Then, a special lobbyist will come to the door and instruct him to seek an official position. Then, he will operate the business of buying and selling disaster victims. Next, what we have to do is wait for the other party to come to the door. Marin said to Kohler with a smile. Once Baron Adair becomes an official in charge of disaster victims as planned, he will definitely send someone to the North Sea Kingdom to contact him. At that time, Marin also plans to make a fuss about it. Chapter 1835 The Great Wall Project. In fact, Marin is now scratching his head about how to recruit immigrants to America. Because of the excessive negative propaganda in the past, people are afraid to go to America now. That is, the prisoners of war bought from Württemberg and Breisgau were sent to America because they had no choice. If people were given the opportunity to choose, most people would refuse. Marin was helpless. In the beginning, in order to prevent Spain, Portugal and France from snatching America, he had to demonize America to scare off the 3 countries. Now, the purpose of scaring off the 3 countries has been achieved, but ordinary people dare not go to America. So, these days, Marin is waiting for the results in Paris while thinking about how to dispel people's fear of America without attracting the covetousness of these 3 countries. First of all, Marin cannot admit that America is not dangerous. Otherwise, Spain, Portugal and France will definitely go crazy for the vast land of America. Especially for a populous agricultural country like France, once they see the vast land of America, they are likely to have a desire to compete. After all, the French have a large population and the strongest ability to develop colonies. If it weren't for the fact that its successive monarchs were obsessed with the hegemony of the European continent, France would be the most suitable country to develop America. In addition, France offended the 2 great maritime powers of England and Spain, and was jointly suppressed by the 2 countries, so that its navigation could not grow. However, for now, the navies of various countries are not very strong. Even the strongest Spain currently does not have the ability to blockade the entire French coast, and at most blockades the Mediterranean coast in southern France. And England only has the ability to blockade the English Channel. The 2 countries are not able to blockade the Atlantic coast in western France. Therefore, Marin must not overly stimulate France at this time, lest France explode its navy. But at the same time, Marin must also give those immigrants some reassurance to prevent them from panic. Otherwise, no immigrants will be recruited. For example, according to the plan this time, Marin sent people to the outskirts of Paris to actively recruit those disaster victims. But the problem is that if the disaster victims cannot dispel their doubts about the danger of America, they will not be willing to leave. Therefore, while waiting for the French to come to negotiate, Marin must also make preparations. The main thing is to dispel the doubts of immigrants and eliminate everyone's fear in publicity. In this way, when we go to Paris to recruit people, we can recruit people. Otherwise, no one is willing to go, and it is not easy to force them. It is really a big problem to dispel the doubts of immigrants and not to arouse the interest of the 3 countries of Spain, France, and Portugal. In particular, this time the recruitment of disaster victims is outside the city of Paris, and it will inevitably be closely monitored by France. Therefore, it is completely impossible to secretly tell the disaster victims the truth and say that America is not dangerous. What should I do? How can I have the best of both worlds, to scare the 3 countries and get the victims? Marin was depressed. At this time, the Jewish rabbi, the deputy minister of finance, came to report on the fiscal expenditure. In the report, the rabbi focused on the issue of the border defense line being built and expressed his concerns about fiscal expenditure. After all, it is a huge expense to build a wall on such a large border. That is to say, the fiscal revenue of the North Sea is very high. If it were another country, even a big country like France, it would not be able to afford it. Marin, who was listening to the report, opened his eyes suddenly and asked, "What did you say just now? Repeat what you said just now." Rabbi was frightened, thinking that he had said something he shouldn't have said, and stammered, "I just said. I said that building a border wall is too expensive, even a big country like France can't afford it." After that, Rabbi looked at Marin with fear, fearing that Marin would have an attack. "That's it." Marin slapped the table and showed an excited expression. Seeing that Marin looked happy, Rabbi breathed a sigh of relief. Marin didn't discuss it with him, but called Kohler and Saul to discuss things. "You mean, we can dispel the concerns of immigrants in the name of building the Great Wall?" "That's right." Marin nodded confidently and continued, "You also know that in ancient Rome, the Roman Empire built Hadrian's Wall to prevent the Celtic barbarians from the north from moving south, thus ensuring the safety of England. This story is widely circulated in Europe. We can also use this interface to publicize that we have discovered a peninsula in America that is as big as England. Well, it's the Delaware Peninsula. That peninsula is not as big as England, right? It seems to be smaller than the Jutland Peninsula. Kohler knows the situation in America. The Delaware Peninsula is currently under development, and as the head of intelligence, he is naturally clear about the relevant data. In fact, the Delaware Peninsula is only 14,000 square kilometers, much smaller than the Jutland Peninsula. Marin nodded and said, "Of course I know that the Delaware Peninsula is not as big as England, but I am just using this as an introduction to attract French disaster victims to immigrate to America. When the time comes, I will advertise that I have built a long wall similar to Hadrian's Wall in the northern part of the Delaware Peninsula, which is surrounded by the sea on 3 sides. It can cut off the connection with the wild continent and block the invasion of barbarians. At that time, we only need to repair the Great Wall and cut down all the trees on the peninsula, and then we can farm and graze normally. As for the cost of building the Great Wall, the French are very clear. Even if it is a small wall of dozens of kilometers separating the Calais fortress and the French mainland, the French are estimated to have invested hundreds of thousands of gold coins. Hearing that we are blocking the barbarians by building the Great Wall, it is difficult for the French to covet it." After a pause, Marin continued, "As for Spain and Portugal, they don't seem to pay enough attention to agriculture. They seem to care more about gold and silver mines." Marin was not talking nonsense about this. Throughout history, the Spanish colonial empire and the Portuguese colonial empire seemed to be constantly looking for gold and silver mines in America and Africa, or exchanging gold sand with the natives, but they didn't pay attention to farming. The only farming behavior was probably growing sugarcane in tropical areas. After all, sugarcane is very popular in the European market. Therefore, using the reason of building the Great Wall to block the barbarians can not only make the French disaster victims feel safe, but also prevent the agricultural empire of France from coveting it. Damn, spend so much money? Forget it. And Spain and Portugal, 2 countries keen on finding treasures, would probably be very surprised. And spend so much money to build a wall just for farming? Did the Grand Duke of the North Sea Marin's brain get kicked by a donkey? Of course Marin has an excuse to explain, "I have become the king of America, and I must have a larger and more reliable territory in America. Otherwise, it is not worthy of the name. Look, the Delaware Peninsula is only connected to the land in the north. As long as the Great Wall is built, we can resist the invasion of the forest barbarians. When the time comes, clear out the barbarians in the peninsula, and it will be a paradise suitable for development." "Perfect." Marin snapped his fingers, and then ordered, "You two, arrange for your men to promote this Great Wall project. Start from the interior of the North Sea, and then send people to Paris to promote it." Chapter 1836 Various Routines. After Marin finished his instructions, Kohler nodded to show that he understood. But Saul raised his hand and said, "I have a question, Your Majesty." "Go ahead." "We say that the Delaware Peninsula is bigger than England. Isn't that too high profile?" Saul hesitated. "Huh." Marin was a little puzzled. Saul continued, "Your Majesty, perhaps we are used to the huge size of America. However, don't forget that this is in Europe. According to what you said, half of the countries in Europe are generally only tens of thousands of square kilometers. A country like France with an area of 500,000 square kilometers is considered a top power. These are what Marin usually says. But the problem is, even if England is only 130,000 square kilometers, it is also one of the top powers in Europe. At least, Portugal is not that big. You exaggerated that the Delaware Peninsula is as big as England. Isn't that drool-inducing? You know, in Germany, the Principality of Clever is less than 2,000 square kilometers, only about 1,800 square kilometers. So, I don't think the area should be exaggerated like this. Otherwise, it will easily attract covetousness. Moreover, the more than 300,000 victims in Paris do not need a territory as large as England to accommodate them. Well, I think it is enough to say that it is as big as the Jutland Peninsula. Marin thought about it really is. England has a population of 3 million. A good place that can accommodate 3 million or more people is indeed easy to be envied. Therefore, it is safer to follow Saul's statement. The Jutland Peninsula is also 25,000 square kilometers, which is less than 1/5. If we promote that there are many rivers, many plains, and a warm climate. In theory, it is more than enough to accommodate more than 600,000 people. According to the population-to-land ratio in France, it is no problem to accommodate 750,000 people. And the area of the Jutland Peninsula will not be too coveted. Because, although this area is not small, it is far overseas. There are risks at sea, and a place as big as the Jutland Peninsula will not make people crazy. But if you hear that there is a good place as big as England and bigger than Portugal, even if you can only farm, it will make people crazy. Therefore, Marin listened to Saul's advice and changed to promote that the Delaware Peninsula is only as big as the Jutland Peninsula. However, the focus is on promoting the warm climate there, which is mainly plains and rivers. Also, it is suitable for growing wheat. Of course, the climate there is hotter in summer and colder in winter, which will also be made clear in advance. Then, the people sent to recruit farmers will promise on behalf of Marin that they will be given cold-proof clothing in winter and will be introduced to cold-resistant kangs. This is also a means of propaganda. If you only say good things, people will suspect that you are bragging. When saying good things, picking out some not-so-serious shortcomings and explaining them clearly will make people more convinced. You see, I don't hide the problem, how sincere. Just like John Lafitte's obstruction in saying ugly things in advance, it strengthened the confidence of François I. In fact, these are just low-level routines that have been used by later generations. However, they are easy to use. Moreover, in this era, these routines are still new in Europe and are not easy to be seen through. In order to enhance persuasiveness, Marin specially drew a map of the Delaware Peninsula himself. On the Chinese map, there is no problem with the outline of the Delaware Peninsula, which is basically a godlike restoration. However, the Chesapeake Bay west of the Delaware Peninsula was deliberately enlarged by Marin. The reason for the enlargement is to highlight the safety of the Delaware Peninsula. If it appears close, people will worry that the barbarians on land will attack in canoes. In addition, Marin also deliberately hid the map of the American continent and simply drew an outline on the large map. The land part is marked with the words, barbarian territory, everywhere. Moreover, Marin also marked a lot of imaginary names with a bad taste, such as Warsong Clan, Blackrock Clan, Frostwolf Clan, and Raven Clan, and Blood Ring Clan. Marin felt that his creation was too strenuous, so he directly borrowed the grand settings of later Warcraft, and also borrowed the names of great people such as Grom, Orgrim, Durotan, and Gul'dan. Then, some legends were added. For example, Grom is extremely powerful and is good at using a two-handed axe to jump and split people in half. Orgrim is good at using the 80-pound Doom Hammer to smash his opponent's head. And Durotan, the Frostwolf chieftain, is good at driving the raised Frostwolves to eat people. As for Gul'dan, he likes to sacrifice living people to demons and eat children's hearts. In short, all this seems so terrible. But Marin also emphasized in the brochure that these people are only fierce in the dense jungle, and outside the forest, they can't beat the regular army of the North Sea. If they are blocked outside by the Great Wall, these people are not threatening. While dispelling the doubts of the French victims, they also need to be induced. Therefore, Marin will let his people who go to the propaganda emphasize that going to the American colonies is suitable for growing wheat, and everyone will often have white bread to eat. In Europe, this is a life only enjoyed by the nobles. For this reason, Marin plans to transfer several ships of wheat flour from the New York colony to make white bread as bait to lure the hungry victims. Although white bread is not as nutritious as black bread, its appearance and taste are very good. If you add some butter and maple syrup. Forget it, the nobles can't eat this kind of bread, and it's too wasteful to give it to the victims. Ordinary wheat bread will do. But even so, it's enough. At that time, Marin will ask the people responsible for recruiting victims to build a baking oven at the upwind side of the refugee camp. When the white bread is out of the oven, follow the wind and blow the wheat fragrance to the refugee camp. It's strange that the victims who drink thin wheat porridge all day can bear it. This is what Marin learned from those who sell roast duck in his previous life. Those grandsons used electric fans to blow the aroma of the roast duck oven to the street at the end of the workday. And when people get off work and go home, they are hungry and want to eat dinner. At this moment, he suddenly smelled the aroma of roast duck. If he was not too tight on money, he would often buy one and take it back. After he finished eating, he remembered, hey, didn't I say I wanted to lose weight? Why am I eating roast duck again? Marin was often tricked in his previous life. Although it was silent, it was very effective. Especially when a group of disaster victims were dizzy with hunger, even the aroma of tasteless steamed buns would make them drool. In order to increase the aroma, Marin thought about it and decided to grant a batch of milk powder and goat milk powder to add to the bread. In this way, when the bread comes out of the oven, it will not only have the ordinary wheat aroma, but also the milk aroma. At that time, the effect will be even better. In short, Marin is now desperately recalling the various routines of his previous life. The purpose is to trick the victims in Paris and make them willing to go to America. Chapter 1837, Coal Briquettes and Bricks. In order to cooperate with the propaganda plan, Bahia State began to build brick kilns on a large scale. These brick kilns are tall vertical kilns, and the fuel used is not firewood, but the coal balls that are unique to Bahia State. These spherical coal balls made of coal powder may not be as efficient as honeycomb coal. However, in large-scale production, they are much better than honeycomb coal. Because honeycomb coal has poor load-bearing capacity and high requirements for placement, it needs the air holes to face the eyes, which is very inconvenient for production. Therefore, large furnaces and earth kilns prefer simple and crude fuel such as coal balls. However, the problem with coal balls is that the combustion temperature is too high. If firewood is used to burn the kiln, the temperature is generally not very high, generally reaching 700 to 1000 degrees. It just so happens that the temperature range for burning bricks is between 900 and 1100 degrees. Exceeding this temperature, the burned bricks are overfired bricks, also called overburned bricks, with various irregular deformations. When using firewood to burn earth kilns, the temperature generally does not exceed 1100 degrees, and the only worry is that the temperature is not enough. It is different with coal, which is easy to overburn. You know, coal can burn to 1700 degrees or even 1900 degrees when there is enough blast. Therefore, it is a big problem to control the temperature when using coal balls to burn bricks. Later, Marin thought of a way to measure the temperature with copper wire. Marin remembered that the melting point of copper is 1083 degrees, which is very close to the upper limit of 1100 degrees for burning bricks. So, he thought of a way to have someone use a clamp to clamp the iron wire with a small piece of thin copper wire and probe it into the furnace. If the copper wire melts, it is overburned. If it does not melt, it is normal. Of course, this is only used for preliminary testing. If you use copper wire to measure the temperature every time, you will lose a lot of copper. At the beginning, there were all kinds of situations when using coal to burn bricks, and many strange and overburned bricks were produced. Later, after losing a lot of copper wire, some craftsmen who were good at burning bricks modified the route, added some vents to prevent the kiln temperature from being too high, and finally controlled the temperature. Then, Marin asked people to compile a work manual, using the mature coal briquette kiln as the standard, and began to promote it, asking people to work according to the standard guidance steps. Sure enough, a lot of cheap bricks were easily fired. You know, coal has low cost and high combustion heat, which is much more convenient than using firewood. In order to promote, Marin also built several coal briquette brick kilns near Emden Port, and burned bricks all day long for outsiders to see. Although it polluted the atmosphere, Marin did not live in Emden, so who cares? As carts of bricks were continuously pulled out of the coal briquette brick kilns near Emden Port and shipped out to the sea in front of the world, said to be shipped to America, people saw it with their own eyes, and they had to believe it even if they didn't believe it. In fact, the brick kilns in Emden Port were just demonstrations. The real output is still in Cape Breton Island. The local area is close to the Sydney coal mine and has rich soil resources. It is not too easy to burn bricks. If a large number of bricks were burned in the North Sea country, Marin would not be willing to give up the soil resources. After all, the local land resources are not so abundant, and clay is also precious, right? But it's different in America. The most abundant thing there is land and soil, so you don't feel bad about burning bricks. Moreover, although the Sydney coal mine on Cape Breton Island does not produce much coal, the use of coal is also small in this era without industry. It just so happens that using coal to burn bricks can make the best use of it and avoid waste. Marin calculated that if coal balls are used to burn bricks, the cost of coal balls is originally lower than that of firewood, and the fuel cost is reduced a lot. In addition, coal balls have a high calorific value, which can burn more bricks and expand the kiln a lot. In this way, more bricks can be burned and the cost is reduced a lot. In the end, the cost of bricks burned in coal briquette kilns is several times lower than that of firewood kilns. Moreover, coal gang and coal slag can be crushed and mixed into bricks to burn bricks, saving soil. Marin calculated, and finally discovered a secret that is, although bricks are expensive, they are also made by people. The cost is actually mainly spent on manpower. For example, a brick kiln was set up near a coal mine on Cape Breton Island. The fuel coal was produced by Marin's own coal mine, and only the labor cost was required. The same is true for brick making, whether it is making bricks, firing kilns, or shipping bricks later. In fact, the material cost can be almost ignored. The real cost of bricks still comes from human labor. In other words, as long as there are enough people, a lot of cheap bricks can be burned in places like Cape Breton Island where coal and soil resources are rich and only the labor cost is paid. Even if it is shipped back to the mainland, it is cheaper than burning bricks in the mainland. After all, local brick burning consumes clay, and coal briquettes have to be transported from the Ruhr area or Newcastle. And this low-cost brick is very beneficial to urban construction. Before, in order to save money, Marin promoted low-cost adobe houses in China. But this kind of house is okay in rural areas, but it seems not harmonious in cities. Therefore, Marin's plan is to gradually replace all adobe houses with brick houses in the future. By then, this kind of tiled house built with low-cost sintered bricks will be popular in the cities of the North Sea. In addition, this kind of house will use cement as an adhesive between bricks. After the house is built, cement will be applied to the outside of the house, just like the square that was popular in the rural areas of China in later generations. Then, a layer of lime will be brushed on the outside of the cement, which is white, bright and beautiful. Although the cost has increased greatly, Marin knows that this will also boost GDP. Besides, the brickmaking business is also Marin's own. Even if it makes less money, it is profitable. In short, it can also be regarded as boosting domestic demand. This is the trick of China's economic construction in the 21st century, the infrastructure maniac and boosting domestic demand. In order to make a name for himself in France, the brick-carrying ship sent by Marin deliberately stopped and resupplied at the port of Le Havre at the mouth of the Seine River in France, so that the French could see with their own eyes that many bricks were taken to America to build the Great Wall. Then, the news will be passed back to Paris along the Seine River. In fact, in history, the port of Le Havre was an important port that was ordered to be built by François I in 1517. Now, Le Havre is just a small port in a fishing village. But Marin knew the potential of this port and had arranged for merchants from the North Sea Chamber of Commerce to sneak in here, buy a large piece of land, and build a dock to make it an important port of call. When François I started to build here, the merchants sent by Marin before would be able to get a lot of benefits. Because of the entry of Marin's merchants, Le Havre, the original small fishing village, has gradually become a port town, but the walls have not been built yet. Marin's merchants built several long bridge docks here, and also built a lot of warehouses for rent, and opened taverns and hotels. In time, even if François I did not order the construction of the port again, this place would be able to develop. Because the conditions here are too good, located at the mouth of the Seine River, it can connect to the capital Paris, and it is definitely a first-class transshipment port. The brick-carrying ship of the North Sea deliberately stopped here for supplies, and the sailors also received instructions to go ashore to the tavern to drink and brag. I believe that it won't take long for the news to reach Paris. In this way, it will be convenient for Marin to send people to recruit immigrants. Chapter 1838 Pirates appear. Unconsciously, time is quietly passing. The eventful year of 1515 has passed, and time has entered 1516. In January, the weather is still cold. But the nobles of Beihai Kingdom did not feel any severe cold, because they had a Kong fireplace at home and down jackets when they went out. Since the technology of using carbon disulfide to dissolve rubber to make raincoats was mastered, the problem of down jackets leaking hair has also been solved. Applying a layer of rubber on the outer layer of the cloth wrapped in duck down can prevent the cloth from leaking hair. Moreover, after applying rubber, it can not only prevent rain, but also wind. After all, after applying rubber, the air permeability of the cloth becomes worse, and the cold wind cannot blow in, and it will not be frozen at all. However, there is also a problem, that is, the body heat is difficult to dissipate. Therefore, wearing this kind of down jacket, not only will you not feel cold, but you will often feel hot. As for the common people, they must not be treated so well. After all, duck down is very expensive. Therefore, they can generally only wear straw-woven raincoats to keep warm. Even in the absence of quilts, they can only use straw curtains woven from grass to cover themselves to keep warm. But the scale of cotton planting in Savannah is getting bigger and bigger. Marin estimates that cotton can be supplied to the country in large quantities next year. At that time, he plans to promote quilts and cotton clothes. As for cotton cloth, there is no need to promote it so urgently. Anyway, linen and woolen cloth are enough now. If cotton cloth is promoted in a hurry, it will easily dampen the enthusiasm of the people to raise sheep and grow flax. Marin is not a pure colonialist and will not ignore the lives of the people. People are raising sheep and growing flax well. If you suddenly dump cotton cloth, many people will definitely go bankrupt. As for recruiting French disaster victims, Marin is almost ready. His brick-carrying ship has passed the port of Le Havre several times, and the news should have reached Paris. However, the French side seems to have poor execution. So far, Baron Adair has been bankrupted. It's funny to say that Baron Adair has been in the casino for a long time and has a very good gambling skill and the ability to see through scams. The first batch of cheaters sent by the King of France were actually discovered by Baron Adair, and several cheaters were almost beaten to death. If the city guards had not been prepared, they would not have been able to save these unlucky guys. Later, Count Det, who was in charge of this matter, was more cautious and selected several people with higher cheating skills. After carefully testing many times, he made another move and finally deceived Baron Adair and slowly cheated away his remaining property. Now, Baron Adair is also at the end of his rope, and the lobbyists arranged by Count Det also came to persuade him. However, the progress was finally behind, which made François I very depressed. Because during this period, he allocated a lot of food to the victims, which made him feel distressed. At the end of January, good news came from Guantanamo, Cuba. The castle there was basically completed. Outside the castle, tens of thousands of acres of sugarcane fields were reclaimed and sugarcane seedlings were planted in a hurry. In other words, the Vatican's investigation team can now be invited to Cuba and Haiti to investigate the situation and watch the show. However, along with the good news, there was also a very bad news: pirates who robbed North Sea transport ships appeared in the Atlantic Ocean. According to the report of his subordinates, a transport ship full of sugar and rice disappeared in the waters near the Azores. Later, a transport ship passing by found broken masts and canvas floating on the sea. After fishing it up, it was found that the mast seemed to have been broken abruptly. The broken part looked like it had been attacked by iron ball shells. Marin frowned. Near the Azores? Could it be the Portuguese? In those days, the great voyages of England had not yet risen. Even John Cabot, who was sent by Henry VII to explore the Indian route, was captured by Marin, and the signs of the great voyage were directly extinguished. Then, apart from the North Sea Kingdom, only Spain and Portugal were engaged in the great voyages. But Spain and Marin had a good relationship because Marin had saved Juan III's life. Only Portugal resented that Marin had discovered the Indian route and transferred it to Spain, so that they could not enjoy the huge profits of the Indian spice trade alone. And this happened near the Azores, which is the territory of the Portuguese. Marin was sure that there must be the shadow of the Portuguese behind this. In fact, the route over the Azores was not the main route between the North Sea Kingdom and the American colonies. This route was actually used by Marin to confuse Spain and Portugal. When Columbus sailed to America, he took the oval route from the Cape Verde Islands to the west along the ocean current, but when he came back, he went north and passed the Azores. Later, when Marin was running the American colonies, because he opened up the North Atlantic route, that side was not actually used much. However, Marin still sent a few ships every year along Columbus's old route, from the Canary Islands to the west near Cape Verde to America. The return route is to go northeast from Haiti Island, enter the westerly belt, go east all the way, pass near the Azores, and pass by Lisbon. Doing so is nothing more than a sleight of hand, so that Spain and Portugal can see that they are miserably operating the three currently open colonies of Cuba, Haiti, and Grenada. From time to time, the ship will also transport some goods such as sugar, rice, dried bananas and ginger. After all, if there is no output, people will not believe it. In fact, the North Atlantic route is the biggest part of shipping. The ships there have more flights than Columbus's old route, with dozens of round trips a year. Unlike the South, there are only a few round trips a year. But this ship that only goes back and forth a few times a year was actually targeted, which made Marin very angry. You know, a 250-class merchant ship also carries more than 100 tons of cargo. According to the report, the ship was loaded with 50 tons of sugar and 60 tons of rice. Not to mention rice, the 50 tons of sugar, 110,000 pounds, alone are worth 33,000 gold coins. 1 pound of sugar is worth 1 shilling and 6 pfennigs, or 18 pfennigs. Marin didn't really care about this loss, but what he cared about was that the Portuguese would develop the bad habit of supporting pirates. Originally, England was the same. After falling out with Spain because of Catherine of Aragon, the English government directly supported pirates to rob Spanish treasure ships. As long as you rob a gold ship, you can turn it over. Legend has it that Elizabeth I made huge profits by investing in pirate ships to rob Spanish gold ships. Because they tasted the sweetness, pirates later emerged in England, specializing in robbing Spanish gold ships. Even Panama City, a Spanish colonial stronghold, was conquered. To deal with this situation, the best way is to teach the English court, the mastermind behind the pirates, a lesson. But unfortunately, the Spanish Invincible Armada's expedition to England in 1588 was defeated. Then, English pirates became more arrogant and reached their peak in the 17th century. If the Invincible Armada wins the expedition, the situation will be different. The English pirates will definitely keep a low profile. Marin is obviously aware of this problem. The Portuguese have tasted the sweetness this time, and they will do it again. If their ambitions expand, those pirate ships may go to the American colonies to cause trouble. Once they do so, they will discover the truth about the richness of America. We can't do this. We must do something. Marin slammed the table hard and decided to explode. Chapter 1839 Intelligence. Intelligence comes first before troops move. Although Marin was very angry, he first had to figure out who was causing trouble. Therefore, a large number of North Sea spies were sent to Lisbon, using all means and a lot of money to extract intelligence from the middlemen. After half a month of investigation, the intelligence was finally delivered to Marin. It turned out that the robbery of the North Sea transport ship was not the intention of the Portuguese court, but the spontaneous behavior of the Portuguese governor of the Azores, Rui Silva. In other words, the North Sea transport ship was robbed by the official Azores. However, the Portuguese court also knew about this. After all, even if Rui Silva did not report it, the officers of the Azores fleet under his command would report it. Because the garrison in the Azores is an army affiliated with the Portuguese royal family, not Rui Silva's private army. However, the Portuguese court took actions of sheltering and condoning Rui Silva's behavior and helped him cover it up. Why? Because Rui Silva's sister Stella Silva was one of the lovers of King Manuel I of Portugal, and a very important one. In this day and age, it is common for a king to have several lovers. Rui Silva was originally a small baron in the countryside of Portugal, and the surname Silva is also very common in Portugal. Silva means forest in Latin, and probably his ancestors were hunters living in the forest. Baron Rui's ancestors got a baron title because of their military exploits, but it was very remote, located in the inland mountainous area of Portugal. This ordinary surname called Silva may not be a big deal in this era. But in the 21st century, it has become a top surname in Brazil, and many football gods have emerged. Of course, this surname can take root in Brazil, it must be because it is not doing well in the local area. If the nobles are doing well, they will definitely stay in the local area. Baron Rui's status is not high, and his territory is also very poor. The most important income for their family is probably planting cork trees. This is one of Portugal's traditional industries, supplying all of Europe. But the Silva family is a tree planter and a supplier of raw materials. They don't get much profit, but they are not as good as those middlemen who resell them. But Rui has a very beautiful sister Stella Silva. Stella has been very beautiful since she was a child and is very famous in the local area. There are many baron families nearby who want to marry the Silva family. After all, Stella is too beautiful. However, Rui doesn't like those poor landlord barons like him around. He thinks that he should find a great noble in the capital Lisbon to marry. In this way, it will also help that family to help the Silva family. Although under normal circumstances, the baron family can only marry with the baron family. However, sometimes, the baron family can also be close to the viscount or even the earl family. The premise is that the women of this family must be very beautiful and make those noble children obsessed. Obviously, Stella has a fascinating beauty. If he hadn't counted on this sister to help the family rise, Rui would have almost gone to see a German orthopedic surgeon. In order to revitalize the family, Rui took the teenage Stella to Lisbon and frequently attended cocktail parties held by various nobles. Sure enough, Stella's beauty amazed Lisbon. But what embarrassed Rui was that most of the nobles were not willing to marry Stella, but wanted Stella to be their lover. This made Rui unhappy. The status of a lover and a wife was very different. The wife's family was considered an in-law, or even an ally. If you can help, you must help. But the lover's family, this can't be guaranteed. After all, the identity is not legal, and people have no obligation to help you. However, in the end, Manuel I took action. Although Manuel I also wanted Stella to be his lover, he was the king and could give Rui what he wanted. Then, Rui gave in. Regardless of what Stella thought, he sent his sister to the king, and then changed his position to the governor of the Azores, which was considered to be mixed into the upper and middle levels of the Portuguese officialdom. But when he arrived in the Azores, Rui found that he had thought too much. It depends on where he was the governor. The Azores are 1,600 kilometers away from the Portuguese mainland, and transportation is very inconvenient. The population of the archipelago is not large, only a few thousand people, and they are mainly engaged in sugarcane planting. The local climate is between subtropical and tropical, and sugarcane can be planted. It is also one of the important sugarcane producing areas in Portugal. In theory, the sugarcane industry is relatively profitable, and Rui Silva should be able to get a lot of benefits. But the bad thing is that the sugarcane industry is a strategic industry in Portugal, controlled by the royal family and several nobles. Most of the sugarcane plantations on the island belong to the royal family and several noble families. Even if he had 10 guts, Rui Silva would not dare to lay his hands on these plantations. Unable to start with these lucrative sugarcane plantations, Rui Silva sadly discovered that the oil and water in this archipelago was really low. In other words, Rui Silva came to be the governor excitedly, but he could only think of ways to deal with the cargo at the docks and squeeze a little bit of oil and water from the ship owners and dock coolies. However, this was seriously inconsistent with Rui Silva's expectations. He gave away a fairy-like sister, but in the end he only got a governor with no oil and water. So, Rui Silva began to feel unbalanced and began to think of other ways. But the Azores, this broken place, is an absolute remote place, and there are no ships from other places passing by at ordinary times. Oh, no, it seems that there are transport ships from the North Sea Kingdom passing by. Rui Silva remembered the transport ships from the savage continent of the North Sea Kingdom that passed by here several times a year. It seems that those ships are full, especially those returning from the savage continent. They are said to be full of sugar and rice and other supplies. Should I do it? Rui Silva was in a dilemma. As the governor, he sent people to inquire. Generally, a North Sea transport ship fully loaded with goods has a total value of tens of thousands of gold coins. If he gets one, it will be enough for him to be the governor of the Azores for decades. But the problem is that he is a little worried. Will there be any trouble if he gets a country's transport ship? Then, he sent people to Lisbon to inquire, can the North Sea country afford to provoke it? As a result, the arrogant Lisbon nobles told him that if it was on land, Portugal really couldn't afford to provoke the North Sea country. But on the ocean, Portugal might not even take Spain seriously, and the North Sea country and Portugal are not bordering, so there is no need to care about what the North Sea country thinks. Because of the misleading information, Rui Silva finally made up his mind to do it. If successful, the tens of thousands of gold coins could be used to bribe the high-ranking officials of the Portuguese court. Then, he could seek to be transferred to a more lucrative place as a governor. In this way, Rui Silva made up his mind to send the Azores fleet under his control, disguised as pirates, to attack a passing North Sea transport ship, and robbed hundreds of tons of sugar and rice. On the Portuguese side, Lisbon was reported later. But the Portuguese did not take this matter to heart, just as Rui Silva had found out before. The Portuguese generally believed that the North Sea's maritime strength was not worth mentioning in front of Portugal. In addition, Rui Silva's sister Stella was a popular person around Manuel I, and there was no need to offend such a person. Therefore, everyone helped to conceal the matter and planned to get away with it. As for the loss of the North Sea, who cares? Chapter 1840 Pretending to be a pirate. I can do that too. Humph. After reading the intelligence, Marin threw the intelligence heavily on the table and snorted in dissatisfaction. Portugal is so arrogant. Do you really think that you are invincible with so many ships? Marin was quite dissatisfied with the Portuguese's self-confidence. Of course, Portugal's self-confidence cannot be blamed. Marin has been hiding its maritime power. The outside world only knows that the North Sea has 10 warships, and does not know that the number of North Sea warships has reached 30. This is because 10 of Marin's 30 warships were sent to Japan. Of the remaining 20, 10 are hidden in the more remote Port William in the Bay of Jade all year round. Only 10 warships will enter and exit the busy Emden naval port at the mouth of the EMS River. In this way, it leaves people with an illusion that the North Sea has only 10 warships. As for those armed merchant ships, because Marin rarely recruits them to participate in naval battles, everyone forgets that those 250-level armed merchant ships are also warships. So, the North Sea Navy gave the outside world an illusion that there are only 10 warships that can fight. Although the 10 warships look big, the heavy guns on the ships are usually covered. The gun ports on the lower gun deck are also closed all year round. The gun ports will only be opened before the war. Therefore, these 10 warships look big, but they don't seem to be very powerful. The Portuguese confidently believe that although the 10 warships of the North Sea Kingdom are tall, their combat effectiveness is estimated to be not weak. However, compared with the dozens of warships that Portugal can mobilize at any time, it is still not worth mentioning. You know, in an emergency, Portugal can even requisition more than 100 warships from the people to participate in the war. Even facing the equally powerful Spain, Portugal is full of confidence. But they don't know that the times have changed, and naval warfare is no longer the era of small boats fighting in groups. They don't know that the warships of the North Sea Kingdom have much thicker sides than Portuguese warships and are more resistant to artillery fire. Not to mention the thickened and encrypted warships, even ordinary 250-level armed merchant ships are more resistant to artillery fire than the popular caravel sailing ships in Portugal. However, the hull structure is something that cannot be seen from the outside. Only after actual combat can we know the specific situation. Just like Rui Silva, although he captured a 250-class armed merchant ship of the North Sea Kingdom, he did not carefully study the structure of the ship and did not know that this type of ship was better than the Portuguese caravel. Speaking of which, it was also unlucky for this ship. In order to confuse the Portuguese, this 250-class armed merchant ship, which could be equipped with 20 cannons, was deliberately not fully equipped with cannons, and only 4 12-pound copper cannons were arranged at the bow and stern. Therefore, the combat effectiveness is insufficient. Otherwise, facing the warships of the Portuguese Azores fleet, it would be no problem to escape, not to mention winning. But the problem is that this ship did not carry enough cannons. In addition, during the naval battle, the main mast was accidentally broken by the enemy ship's shells, and even escape was impossible. So, it can only be regretted. According to intelligence, it seems that among the 40 crew members on the ship, only the loyal captain and first mate were executed after surrendering. The other sailors were taken to a newly opened sugarcane plantation near Ingrid do Hero on Terceira Island as slaves. And this newly opened sugarcane plantation was naturally Rui Silva's own property. The Portuguese royal family and the great nobles did not dare to touch the old sugarcane plantations, so he could only open a new plantation to grow sugarcane. In other words, most of the crew are still alive. Marin confirmed. Yes, Your Majesty, according to intelligence personnel, only the captain and the first mate were killed because they refused to surrender. The rest of the ordinary sailors were taken to be plantation slaves. Can you determine the location? Marin asked. Yes, it's on the seashore 10 kilometers west of Angra do Hero. Kohler replied. The seashore. Can we send ships directly to the shore to raid the plantation and rescue our people? Marin asked. As the soul of a modern man, Marin still gave priority to rescuing the crew. Kohler shook his head and said, according to the intelligence, the new plantation named Silva Village seems to have a steep coast nearby, which is not suitable for ships to dock. If we want to land by force, we can only land by boat. If necessary, we may have to wade. It's not easy. Marin touched his chin, thought for a while and said, how about this, you call Kidd and the others, I have something to ask him. In the afternoon, the Navy Commander-in-Chief Kidd came to Marin's office. Kidd, go and select a group of elite Marines. I need them to do one thing, save people. Save people. Kidd was a little confused. Marin patted his head and told Kidd the details of what happened. Kidd suddenly realized, oh, it turns out to be to rescue the crew of the Seer. Seer is the name of the unfortunate transport ship that was hijacked. But Kidd then asked, Your Majesty, the Silva village is only 10 kilometers away from Angra do Heroes where the Portuguese fleet is located. Once the ships we send out initiate a landing, they will inevitably alarm the Portuguese warships in Angra do Heroes. Although there are only 6 or 7 ships over there, our navy can defeat them. But the question is, Your Majesty, are we ready to completely turn against the Portuguese? Hearing Kidd's question, Marin fell into deep thought. Kidd's words made sense. He didn't even need to send out warships to deal with the 6 or 7 broken ships in Angra do Heroes. He could just send out a few 250-class armed merchant ships loaded with artillery and ammunition. But the question is, what happens after it's solved? Turn against Portugal completely. Marin now needs to prepare for war with France, and it is not suitable to confront Portugal head-on. Although he is not afraid of Portugal, once the two countries tear their faces apart, they will definitely attack each other's shipping, affecting the trade interests of the North Sea Kingdom. In particular, if Portugal cannot be crushed in one fell swoop, the other party may really send ships to America to cause trouble. How can we make Portugal afraid to act rashly without falling out with Portugal? Marin fell into deep thought. This contemplation lasted for an hour or so, and Kidd was getting a little restless. Finally, Marin raised his head and thought of something. By the way, Portugal's core interest is the spice trade. Marin grasped the key point. For Portugal, the Indian spice trade is their lifeline. Whoever dares to move, they will fight to the death. But what if we warn the other party? However, Marin certainly cannot send the North Sea Kingdom warships to intercept the Portuguese spice ships. However, he can send people disguised as British pirates. British pirates, what a good excuse. Marin laughed. So he continued to make arrangements, send someone to find a few ships that look like British ships, modify the ships, nail iron sheets on the sides, and cover the iron sheets with black paint. Then, send our sailors, disguised as British pirates, to the Atlantic to teach the Portuguese a lesson. However, only rob the ship, not hurt people. To put it bluntly, Marin sent people to rob a Portuguese spice ship, not because he really wanted to rob, but to give the Portuguese a warning, if you don't restrain yourself, we can also send pirates to intercept your spice ships. Compared with the ships loaded with spices, the ships transporting sugar and rice from the North Sea Kingdom are not worth mentioning. Because, in Europe, spices can be more expensive than gold, but it is still possible to be more expensive than silver. A ship loaded with spices is much more expensive than a ship loaded with sugar and rice. Therefore, the loss of a spice ship and the loss of a ship loaded with sugar and rice are two completely different concepts. However, Marin did not want to tear his face with Portugal. Therefore, he would only order the execution of the captain and the first mate of the robbed spice ship, exactly the same as Rui Silva did. In this way, it can also be regarded as a warning to Portugal, can you pretend to be pirates? I can. Moreover, the ships sent by Marin will be of English style. The people sent will also pretend to be English pirates. In this way, even if it is said openly, Marin can push it and cheat directly. However, the Portuguese will know what he means. However, in order to prevent the Portuguese from being arrogant and provoking a war, Marin still made two preparations: order the 20 warships of the North Sea to prepare for war. At the same time, allocate 20 armed merchant ships, coordinate training, and prepare for a naval battle. Yes. Kidd immediately stood up and saluted. Chapter 1841, Revenge First. Marin's worries are not unfounded. You know, there are only 4 maritime powers in Europe now: Spain, Portugal, England and Venice. Among them, Spain is a dual-class maritime power in the Mediterranean and the Atlantic. It not only has a powerful carrack fleet, but also a powerful galley fleet, with the strongest comprehensive strength. Portugal is second, but in terms of sailing warships active in the ocean, Portugal is stronger than Spain, and is the first naval power in the Atlantic. As for the later overlord England, it is currently limited by national strength and population and can only be ranked below the two countries. And Venice, this is a pure galley country, which can only dominate the Mediterranean with small winds and waves. In fact, if we only talk about the strength of galleys, Venice will surpass Spain by a lot. But the problem is that Venice now needs to compete with the newly emerging Ottoman Turkey for maritime hegemony in the eastern Mediterranean, so it can't do its best to deal with Spain. Otherwise, Venice will definitely teach Spain a lesson in the Mediterranean. In addition, there is another maritime power. Well, it can't be regarded as a country, but a union, that is the Hanseatic League. The maritime strength of the Hanseatic League is comparable to that of England. Even more than one. If Lübeck and Hamburg, the king and queen, join forces, England will have to give in 3 points. As for Bremen, the third oldest, it has been seized by Marin and is considered Marin's territory. Moreover, in the eyes of foreign forces, because of the friendly relationship between Marin and the Hanseatic League, the maritime power of the North Sea Kingdom is actually counted as part of the Hanseatic League rather than an independent force. Because, in terms of the number of ships alone, the North Sea Kingdom is indeed a bit small. At present, the North Sea Kingdom has only 70 or 80 merchant ships active in various parts of Europe all year round. And there are only 30 or 40 ships active between America and Europe. But the ships active between America and the mainland cannot be seen by other European countries. Therefore, the outside world's assessment of the North Sea Kingdom is that it has 10 warships and dozens of merchant ships. In the eyes of the outside world, this kind of strength is not even as good as the original Hanseatic free city of Bremen. In terms of the number of ships alone, it is indeed the case. Therefore, the North Sea Kingdom will be looked down upon by Portugal. But Portugal didn't know how powerful the hidden firepower of the North Sea Kingdom was. For example, there are currently 70 or 80 250 class armed merchant ships active in various parts of Europe. In theory, each ship can be equipped with 20 guns. Moreover, they are all main battle guns such as 12-pound guns. But when the merchant ships of the North Sea Kingdom traveled to various parts of Europe, most of the guns were removed, and only 3 or 4 12-pound guns were retained as a symbol. At the same time, it was also to confuse the enemy. Then, it gave other countries the illusion that the merchant ships of the North Sea Kingdom seemed to have little combat effectiveness. In fact, most of the sailors of these merchant ships, except for the newcomers, have received naval warfare training. Moreover, each ship is equipped with 40 matchlock guns. Once pirates approach, the sailors will take out the Vulcan guns from the bottom cabin to fight back. In the Mediterranean, the merchant ships of the North Sea Kingdom have repelled several pirate attacks. In other words, in theory, if a naval battle occurs, the North Sea Kingdom can dispatch up to 30 warships and 120 250 class armed merchant ships to fight. The premise is that these merchant ships are all in the country. But this is impossible, because the 30 or 40 250 class armed merchant ships traveling to and from North America are always on the move and it is difficult to call them back. Even the 70 or 80 merchant ships in the mainland usually have at most 30 or 40 at home. Therefore, in order not to affect trade, Marin will draw at most 20 armed merchant ships from them to fight and form a joint fleet with 20 warships. Although there are only 40 ships, their firepower is far greater than that of Portugal. Although the Portuguese warships also have 20 or 30 cannons on them, most of them are 2 or 3 pound level Portuguese cannons with little power. This kind of artillery, let alone penetrating the side of the North Sea warship, can't even penetrate the side of the 250 class armed merchant ship. Moreover, in order to prepare for war, this time Marin directly ordered to nail tinplate on the side of the 2250 class armed merchant ships in preparation to prevent artillery fire. In this way, with the firepower of Portugal's largest 12-pound cannon, it can't cause any damage to the North Sea warship. In addition, because the Gama has led a fleet to the Ming dynasty. Therefore, the Portuguese court can only use 50 to 60 warships at most, and most of them are carracks and caravels of about 200 tons. With such a scale, it can't beat the combined fleet of the North Sea Kingdom. But if Portugal breaks out, it can mobilize hundreds of ships to fight. Therefore, Marin prepared 20 warships and 20 armed merchant ships to prepare for the unexpected. However, if he can avoid fighting, Marin will avoid this battle. After all, whether he wins or loses, it is not good for Marin. How to say it, if he loses, needless to say, the colonies of the North Sea Kingdom may be taken away by Portugal, and it is naturally finished. And if he wins, it is not a good thing. Why? Because Marin does not have enough strength to annex the benefits of Portugal after the defeat. The result may be cheap Spain. After all, the North Sea Kingdom has too few ships and too few sailors. Even if he wins Portugal, he can't eat the benefits spit out by the Portuguese. In this case, even if they win, what's the benefit? And if Spain gets the advantage in the end, that's not what Marin wants to see. You know, Spain is already very strong, both on land and sea. If they take advantage of Portugal, a stronger and more fierce opponent will appear in front of Marin. Therefore, Marin's current preparations are mostly to force the Portuguese back, rather than to win or lose with the Portuguese. But the future is uncertain. Once England is annexed and England's demographic dividend is digested, if there are enough sailors, Marin will dare to suppress Portugal and boldly swallow the benefits of the Portuguese. Because England is not short of sailors. As long as there are ships, the overseas interests of the Portuguese can be robbed to their heart's content. But those preparations are all for the future. At the moment, Marin plans to retaliate against Rui Silva first. He is not a person who will swallow his anger after being invaded. It is definitely not possible to send a fleet directly to the Azores to beat Rui Silva, which is equivalent to declaring war on Portugal. Therefore, we have to think of another way. So, Marin called Kohler and asked, "Where is the fief of the Silva family?" Kohler went back to check the information and reported, in a mountainous area near the city of Braganza in northeastern Portugal. Braganza? Marin thought of the Braganza dynasty that ruled Portugal after 1640. But now, it is obvious that the Duke of Braganza has nothing to do with the throne. Moreover, the Silva family is just an inconspicuous noble family in the Duke of Braganza. After coming to his senses, Marin asked, besides the cork production industry, what other industries does the Silva family have outside the territory? Kohler flipped through the information and said, yes, there are grape planting and winemaking, logging and wood processing industries. In addition, there is cattle breeding. Marin thought for a while and ordered, okay, you order the North Sea Kingdom spies in Portugal, from now on, do everything possible to attack all industries in Baron Silva's territory. We need cork products so we will purchase them normally. As for its wood processing industry, send people to burn down the wood processing plant in Baron Silva's territory. There must be a lot of wood stored there. As for the wine industry, send people to sneak into the winery in the middle of the night, smash the barrels, and let the wine flow all over the ground. Raising cattle, well, send people to poison all the cattle. After giving the order, Marin sneered, "Humph, you want to take advantage of me? Wait for the next life." He estimated that after doing these things, the Silva family would lose at least tens of thousands of gold coins. Although it could not offset Marin's losses, Marin did not care. He just wanted to give Rui Silva a warning and disgust him. As for the loss, he had a lot of money and could afford it. Chapter 1842, The Fort and the Restless. In fact, this level of revenge is quite serious. After all, for Rui Silva, the barony of Silva is his real home. The Azores is just a place where he works, and he is just a passerby in the Azores. The home was attacked, not to mention the amount of money lost, but the foundation was touched, which is definitely a big deal. And this lesson will definitely make the confused Rui Silva sober up. And for a baron, it is absolutely terrible for his hometown to be remembered by a foreign monarch. This shows that he himself may no longer be safe. It stands to reason that doing things like this is very unruly and disgraceful. But the problem is that it was Rui Silva who pretended to be a pirate and attacked the North Sea transport ship first. Marin used this method to warn the other party, and Rui Silva did not dare to stand up and accuse Marin. Because if this matter is made public, he will be the first to suffer. After all, pretending to be a pirate may have been done by many nobles, but it is absolutely not allowed to be brought to the table. Of course, Marin doesn't really care about Rui Silva's thoughts. What he really cares about is the position shown by the Portuguese upper class in this incident. It is obvious that the Kingdom of Portugal looks down on the North Sea Kingdom and condones and acquiesces to Rui Silva's behavior. This is what Marin can't stand the most. If it weren't for the worry about future conflicts with France, and the fact that the annexation and digestion of England had not been completed, Marin planned to teach Portugal a lesson. But things have priorities, and the conflict with Portugal is far less important than the confrontation with the French. Therefore, Marin is now very troubled, that is, how to warn the Portuguese without magnifying the matter. After all, if a full-scale war with Portugal is launched, the annexation of England will be postponed indefinitely. Never mind, let's prepare for war first. If we don't hurt the other side, I guess they won't really pay attention to the strength of the North Sea Kingdom. Marin rubbed his head and could only decide this way first. But in order to prevent Portugal from getting dizzy and attacking the North Sea country, Marin still made many preparations. For example, in several military ports such as Emden Port, forts were built. Since they helped the Ming dynasty to build forts, there is no reason not to build them at home. Moreover, Marin planned to build them with great fanfare and show them to the Portuguese. The purpose, of course, is to dispel the Portuguese idea of expedition to the North Sea country. Don't laugh, don't think this is a joke, but it may really happen. Originally in history, Spain felt that it was offended by England, so it sent the Invincible Armada to expedition to England. Although the ending was tragic, the Spaniards were full of confidence before launching the expedition. For the same reason, Portugal is also full of confidence now. As the first country in Europe to launch the Great Voyage, Portugal is very confident in its maritime power. Therefore, it is not ruled out that they may make wrong decisions in a daze. Therefore, Marin needs to throw some cold water on them. For example, Marin announced that 2 forts guarding the estuary of the Ems River would be built in Emden Port, the most important foreign trade port in the North Sea. The specific location is on a pointed corner 10 kilometers west of Emden. On the opposite bank is the port of Delfzijl in the Groningen region of West Frisia. The 2 places are across the river from each other, and it is a relatively narrow place at the mouth of the Ems River. If forts are built in 2 places, the safety of the port of Emden can be protected to a large extent. Unlike the Ming Dynasty forts in Human, this one is not equipped with 12-pound Napoleon cannons, but with red cannons that are more powerful than Napoleon cannons. The shells of the Napoleon cannon are only 12 pounds, while the shells of the red cannon are 18 pounds and more powerful. When the Napoleon cannon is fired at an angle of 10 degrees, the range can reach about 1,900 meters. The red cannon, after using granular gunpowder with high purity and more scientific gunpowder ratio, can reach a range of 3,000 meters. The Qing dynasty was stupid. They lost the granular gunpowder of the Ming dynasty, and the gunpowder ratio was not as scientific as that of the British. Therefore, the red cannon, which should have been powerful, had an effective range of only about 500 meters, which was far inferior to the British smoothbore cannon in artillery battles. In fact, when Zhuozongtang went on the western expedition, he dug up the Ming dynasty's blooming shells and sighed. But the backwardness of the Qing dynasty was actually their own fault. In order to fool the Han people, the rulers deliberately boasted that the Manchus were invincible in bows and horses. But the problem lies here. In the end, the rulers of the Qing dynasty actually believed it themselves. For example, the great chief Qianlong was obviously fooled by his own people and really believed that the Manchus were invincible in bows and horses. Then, the British ambassador threw the musket presented by the British ambassador into the inner treasury without even looking at it. In short, this is a farce. Kong Matsi had long discovered the power of firearms and the threat to the Manchus. Therefore, he deliberately laid out and exaggerated the invincible bows and horses of the Manchus, and deliberately ignored the role of firearms to scare the Han people. However, because the propaganda was too much, the poor grandson of Kangxi, Chief Qianlong, was also fooled. Then, the entire Qing dynasty believed this nonsense until it was awakened by the British. Because of the suppression and lack of attention to firearms, even the granular gunpowder and shrapnel that appeared in the Ming dynasty could not be passed down. But the Beihai kingdom was different from the Qing dynasty. As soon as Marin came up, he directly promoted the best gunpowder ratio popular in later generations and made granular gunpowder. In addition, the purification of saltpeter and sulfur was strictly controlled to improve the quality. Even the charcoal, the most suitable fir charcoal, was selected, so that the quality of gunpowder reached the level of the British Army in the 19th century. Therefore, the red cannon of the Beihai kingdom can shoot 3,000 meters away. At this distance, the lethality of the shells is very strong. Of course, at a distance of 3,000 meters, don't even think about aiming. Even more than 1,000 meters is more difficult to aim. After all, it is a smoothbore cannon. The iron ball shells start to roll up and down when they exceed a certain distance, making it difficult to hit the target. But it doesn't matter, because each of these 2 artillery batteries will be equipped with at least 50 red cannons, and there will be hundreds of cannons on both sides. Hundreds of red cannons will fire at the same time. Even if the hit rate is not high, there will always be a shell that can cover the enemy ship. And considering the thickness of the side of Portuguese warships in this era, basically an 18-pound shell can be effective. Marin's behavior of building artillery batteries has indeed attracted the attention of various countries. But after analyzing it over and over again, everyone found that the North Sea kingdoms building artillery batteries threatened anyone. No wonder, England, which has the ability to threaten the North Sea kingdom, is an ally of the North Sea kingdom. France does not have the ability to threaten the North Sea kingdom from the sea. Spain is also an ally of the North Sea kingdom. Portugal. No one has found any signs of Portugal and the North Sea kingdom falling out. Therefore, after analyzing it, the monarchs and ministers of various countries generally believed that Marin had nothing better to do. Chapter 1843, Anglo-French Naval Conflict. Let alone other countries, even Portugal involved in the incident did not understand the intention of Marin to build the artillery in such a high profile. After all, Marin has not taken action yet. He has not attacked the barony of Silva, nor has he sent people to pretend to be pirates to attack the Portuguese spice ship. Probably, only after Marin takes action, the Portuguese will react to the fact that the North Sea Kingdom's artillery is actually aimed at us. Moreover, it has been laid out for a long time. By then, everything will make sense. However, Portugal will also be in a dilemma and want to teach the other party a lesson. The other party has already built artillery for war preparations, and I am afraid it will not be good. But if you don't teach them a lesson, it seems to damage the face of the eldest brother. Marin doesn't care what the Portuguese think. At the moment, he is busy purchasing saltpeter all over Europe. The reason is that the two artillery forts at the mouth of the Ems River are deployed with hundreds of heavy artillery, which requires a large amount of gunpowder reserves. In fact, Marin is covering up for returning to the country from Chile to prepare for war. After all, with most of the Indian saltpeter divided up by Spain and Portugal, Marin's source of saltpeter is very limited. When the artillery battle starts, everyone will wonder why the North Sea has so much saltpeter. In addition, the agreement to collect manure signed in Rome is also beginning to be implemented. A large amount of manure is packed into barrels and transported to Iceland by special ships through the Rhine and other rivers to extract saltpeter. After this series of big moves, the saltpeter shipped back from Chile will not attract attention. After all, Marin had purchased saltpeter on a large scale before. At the same time, this also put pressure on Portugal. People have already stockpiled enough saltpeter, and there is definitely no shortage of gunpowder. Should this war be fought? Marin's series of actions made a lot of noise, but some people's actions were bigger than his. Britain and France began to conflict again. Since England reoccupied the Calais fortress, Anglo-French relations have deteriorated sharply. The two countries have directly advanced from the previous state of face and heart to a state of tearing their faces. The French began to build a wall similar to the Great Wall outside the Calais fortress as a defense against England. At the same time, they also began to develop the navy secretly, intending to turn the tables. François I has realized that if England cannot be restricted at sea, France will not be able to capture the Calais fortress. Because the Calais Strait is so wide, it is too convenient for England to reinforce the Calais fortress. Therefore, François I also began to be ruthless and continued the policy of Louis XII, quietly developing the navy, intending to defeat the British at sea one day. But the problem is that England has not relaxed its surveillance on France. In addition, Marin is also helping to monitor, so it is really difficult for the French navy to develop. For example, François I secretly got a large amount of wood this year and built 8 warships of 200 to 300 tons in Nantes, intending to use them against England. These 8 warships, like the North Sea Kingdom, are special warships, not the temporary conscription from merchant ships in England. As for the sailors on the ship, they were also secretly trained by the French. Without actual ship training, the French used the method they had secretly learned from Marin to use a large rectangular wooden board similar to a swing, shaking it left and right to simulate the shaking situation on the deck of a ship at sea. Then, they competed on it. In this way, the French trained thousands of swordsmen to adapt to the battle on the shaking deck. But unfortunately, when these 8 ships quietly went out to sea for training, Marin, who had already learned the news, sent someone to secretly inform the English. So, these 8 French warships were in trouble. It is true that there are thousands of well-trained swordsmen on these 8 warships, but they are only trained on shaking wooden boards and are not familiar with real ships and naval battles. This is the first time to go out to sea for training, and it was originally to adapt to the situation at sea. If given time, these thousands of swordsmen will definitely become powerful masters of naval warfare. At least, they are masters in boarding battles. However, they have no chance. After the fleet went out to sea, there was no problem at first. But after the fleet entered the port of Brest, it was immediately blocked by the English fleet. England dispatched a total of 20 warships to encircle the new French fleet. These 20 ships were large merchant ships of about 200 tons recruited from the public, of the cog type. Among them, there were 2,000 old sailors who were good at fighting. Obviously, they calculated the number and deliberately targeted the French sailors. Perhaps in Marin's view, these cogs are backward ship types. But in this era when boarding battles are still popular, cogs are still the mainstream ship type. As for the fact that Spain and Portugal defeated the Indian-Egyptian fleet in the Indian Ocean, although it was spread, many people still didn't know it because of the poor information transmission in this era. In addition, the general public's concept can't change so quickly. Moreover, let alone the French, even England, a traditional maritime power, couldn't change its mind for a while. After all, they have been accustomed to boarding battles for hundreds of years, and they are not used to changing to artillery battles all of a sudden. In addition, there is another very important problem, that is, artillery battles consume too much gunpowder and can't afford it. Europe was too short of saltpeter. Except for Spain, Portugal and the North Sea Kingdom, other European countries had no way to purchase saltpeter from overseas. They could only rely on the little bit of frosty earth saltpeter scraped off by ordinary people from the corners of their toilets and stables in cold weather. Therefore, saltpeter was expensive and scarce. Even a powerful country like France could only equip hundreds of artillery pieces, and they were small cannons such as 2 or 3 pound cannons. In addition to the high price of copper, the low consumption of gunpowder for small caliber artillery pieces was also an important reason. Originally in history, until the reign of Charles I, the unlucky man who was beheaded in the 17th century, Britain was extremely short of saltpeter. For this reason, Charles I specially set up a saltpeter collector, who was authorized to break into the toilets and stables of people's homes at any time and anywhere, and plunder the saltpeter frost in the corners to supply the needs of the army. It was not until the English East India Company later found a stable supply channel of saltpeter in India that the shortage of saltpeter in Britain improved. Then, relying on sufficient Indian saltpeter, British warships opened up the ability to fire fiercely and gradually grew into a maritime hegemon. Therefore, in this era, influenced by traditional concepts and saltpeter shortages, Britain and France still used boarding warfare as the core thinking of forming a navy. Of course, France's finances are more abundant, and there are more cannons on board. For example, each of these 8 new warships is equipped with 4 cannons, just like Marin's armed merchant ships. 2 of them are at the bow and 2 at the stern. Among the 4 guns, only one of the bow is a 12-pound gun, and the other 3 are 6-pound guns. The English cog sailing ship has relatively fewer cannons, only 1 cannon at the bow and stern, and they are all 6-pound guns. It's not that they are unwilling to install more cannons. In addition to the problem of insufficient gunpowder supply, the hull cannot withstand the recoil of too many and too large cannons, which is also a very important reason. The cog sailing ship of this era is still a primitive ship type and has not evolved into the later galleon. Therefore, the keel structure of this type of sailboat is simple, the ribs are thin and sparse, and the sides are relatively thin. If a ship with such a structure is really equipped with dozens of guns like the North Sea warships, once the bombardment begins, a row of guns will be fired down, and the enemy will not need to attack, but will be shaken apart by the powerful recoil first. As a last resort, the old warships of this era could only deploy as few guns as possible. Only on the bow and stern, where the structure was relatively solid, were larger guns installed. The old ship was not suitable for installing too many guns on the broadside. Therefore, although guns were used in this naval battle in the Bay of Brest, it was mainly a boarding battle. Chapter 1844, by Dussy. The result of this battle is self-evident. The French warships blocked in the port of Brest were also unable to resist the enemy with more than twice their number. Faced with the English warships that suddenly surrounded and rushed into the port of Brest, the French hastily responded. Although the French were lucky enough to use the 12-pound cannon on the bow to damage an English warship and cause it to sink. However, their own family was even worse. All 8 warships were boarded and set on fire by the English death squad. In order to save the only 8 French warships, 1,000 French swordsmen fought desperately and caused huge casualties to England. However, probably because it was the first time to board the ship for actual combat, although the French swordsmen were skilled and sharp in swordsmanship, they suffered from too little actual combat experience. England was also fierce and sent a large number of elites. Under the desperate attack of the English, more than half of the 1,000 French swordsmen died in battle, and the rest were forced to jump off the ship to escape. The English were not in a good situation either, with more than 300 people killed and more than 400 injured. But in the end, the English achieved their goal, they burned all 8 new French ships. Moreover, they took the opportunity to take away 9 6-pound cannons. As for the 12-pound cannons, the English wanted to get them, but the French organized a large number of reinforcements from the land and planned to row small boats to rob the ships. To avoid problems, the British commander Edward Howard could only order the ships to be burned as soon as possible. Edward Howard was a branch of the Howard family of the Duke of Norfolk and an excellent naval officer. Of course, this generation of the Duke of Norfolk has been demoted to the Earl of Arundel, and Edward Howard can only be regarded as a branch of the Earl's family. Fortunately, he is capable and has been valued by Edward. As long as he has made a few military exploits, he can also get a hereditary title. After losing all the new warships and more than half of the carefully trained swordsmen, Francois I was so angry that he almost vomited blood. Originally, he planned to use the new fleet to contain the English fleet at sea, break England's monopoly on the English Channel, and prepare to recapture the Calais fortress. However, this ambush directly made his one-year efforts go to waste. Can I only watch the English pirates wreak havoc in my French waters? Francois I lamented in the meeting room of the royal palace. At this time, Charles, Count of Nantes, who wanted to become the top French minister, and formerly Charles II, Duke of Gages, suddenly stood up and said, "Your Majesty, I think that the reason why France cannot defeat England in naval battles is not only due to historical reasons, but also because of a lack of outstanding naval talents." Francois I waved his hand weakly and said, "Of course I know, but where can France get naval talents? It's so hard to train some people, but more than half of them were killed by England." But Charles, Count of Nantes emphasized, "Your Majesty, I mean the naval commander, not the sailors." "You mean?" Francois I was a little confused. Count Charles said solemnly, "Your Majesty, France has always lacked commanders and sailors for naval battles. However, we don't have them, but our allies have them." "You mean, is it Portugal?" Francois I guessed. Count Charles shook his head and said, "Not Portugal. Your Majesty, you should know that Portugal has always had a good relationship with Spain and England, and will not risk offending 2 major powers at the same time to support our naval officers and sailors. What I want to say is Venice. At this time, John Lafitte, who had been silent, raised his hand and said, "Excuse me, Lord Count Charles. I remember that although Venice is a maritime power, their strength is galleys, right? But galleys are not suitable for the sea conditions in the Atlantic Ocean, and can only survive in places like the Mediterranean where there are few winds and waves. Count on the Venetians. Do we have to use their galleys to fight the English?" Ha! Hearing this, several French ministers couldn't help laughing. They all understood that galleys in the Mediterranean are different from sailing ships in the Atlantic Ocean. Being powerful in the Mediterranean does not necessarily mean being powerful in the Atlantic Ocean. Count Charles of Nantes said calmly, "Don't be impatient, Viscount John, you will understand after I explain." Then, he cleared his throat and continued, "As we all know, the masts of galleys are low and the sails are small, which are not very suitable for the strong winds in the Atlantic. The galleys that dominate the Mediterranean are not as good as the cogs in the Atlantic. But this is a general situation. When I was fighting against the Spaniards in Italy, I met a Venetian naval officer named Pregent Bidas. He was the commander of the squadron of the Venetian navy and was good at naval warfare. Moreover, I talked with him and found that he was very proficient in naval warfare. Not only was he familiar with the sea conditions and fighting methods in the Mediterranean, he also conducted research on how warships fought in the Atlantic Sea conditions. This time, Mr. Bidas came to Paris to find me and proposed a new way to fight against English warships. What method? Wouldn't it be to use galleys to fight against English cogs? John Lafitte said sarcastically. He and Count Charles were at odds, and the reason was naturally the common competition for favor in the court. Although Count Duarte is also a favorite, he has been in charge of underground work for a long time and is a professional intelligence chief. Francois I still needs his expertise and cannot do without him. Then there are the old ministers of Angoulême, who are all old and trusted subordinates of Francois I, and there is no way to compete. Only John Lafitte and Count Charles, both of whom are wise ministers, with the same personality and positioning, naturally compete for the same resources. Therefore, the two often ridicule and sabotage each other in order to achieve the purpose of suppressing each other. Faced with John Lafitte's sarcasm, Count Charles was not angry. He and John Lafitte are both outsiders from Germany, and they should be united. But the two are bad because they have the same personality and need to snatch the same favor. Therefore, it is inevitable that there will be conflicts. But under normal circumstances, Count Charles is too lazy to pay attention to John Lafitte. It is John Lafitte who suppresses Count Charles at the instruction of Marin. What Viscount John said is right and wrong. Count Charles said with a smile. What do you mean by right or wrong? Francois I asked curiously. Count Charles explained, the method that Pregent Bidas said is indeed based on galleys, but the ships need to be modified first. Transformation. What kind of transformation? Count Det asked curiously. The other ministers also pricked up their ears to listen to Count Charles's explanation. Count Charles explained, in response to the problem of strong winds and waves in the Atlantic Ocean and the English Channel, Pregent Bidas proposed to replace the original galleys' short masts with tall masts. At the same time, use larger sails, just like the sailing ships on the Atlantic Ocean such as cogs and caravels. In this way, the galleys will have good maneuverability in the Atlantic Ocean, which is conducive to fighting with England. Moreover, Pregent Bidas also designed a tactic specifically for the English cogs. After listening to it, I think it is very good, so I want to recommend it to your majesty. Anyway, we have nothing to lose on the sea, so why not give it a try? Maybe a miracle will happen. Hearing this, the young Francis I could not help but nod his head. Yes, France has lost everything on the sea, so it might as well give it a try. Chapter 1845, The Calais Ship. Since he had decided to give it a try, Francis I quickly summoned Bidas, who had come to Paris specially. Bidas was Italian, but not Venetian. He was a sea mercenary leader and a very experienced galley commander. He had served as a squadron commander in the Venetian navy. However, Venice has been fully committed to digging the Suez Canal in recent years, and has tried to avoid conflicts with others at sea, which is relatively peaceful. Therefore, Bidas could not find any good opportunities for promotion for the time being. Moreover, Venice is a commercial republic. Although there are nobles in the country, they were inherited a long time ago, and the governor of the republic was not qualified to grant people titles. Therefore, for Bidas, it is best to find a monarch to serve, and then obtain titles and fiefs by merit. Then, maritime powers such as Spain, Portugal and England became his choice. However, Spain itself is a naval power with a wealth of naval talents, and there is no shortage of Bidas. Portugal and England are concentrating on the development of sailing ships, and Bidas' experience in commanding galleys is useless. Then, only France is left to choose. France was suppressed by England and Spain, and its navy was in a miserable state. It was also lacking in naval commanders, which was the opportunity for Bidas to show his ability. However, whether in the Mediterranean, the Atlantic Ocean or the English Channel, the enemies France faced at sea were too powerful. It was also very difficult to get naval military merits in France. If you rely solely on the experience of galleys. Bidas thought for a long time and felt that it was definitely unrealistic to compete with Spain in the Mediterranean with galleys. Moreover, Spain had money and could build many galleys to form a numerical advantage. As for England, Bidas thought for a long time and felt that there was still a chance. Although England had many ships, most of them were merchant ships of civilian organizations such as the Five Ports Alliance. Only when the royal family needed them would they be recruited from the civilian population. In other words, England actually did not have special warships. This was inseparable from England's poor finances. Although it was also one of the European powers, England's agriculture was poor and only sheep farming had advantages. The wool textile industry was still developing and had not yet formed a dominant industry. Therefore, among the major European countries, England's finances were only slightly better than those of the poorest Habsburg family. Therefore, it was impossible to build a warship that cost at least several thousand gold coins and to maintain a large number of sailors for a long time. This gave Bidas the opportunity to study and crack the English naval tactics. Then, he personally went to the English Channel to investigate and found a very interesting phenomenon. Although the wind in the English Channel is strong, sometimes the wind will become weaker, and sometimes there will be calm. Although the proportion of breeze and calm is very small, it still exists. Unlike the Atlantic Ocean, there are strong winds all day long. This gave Bidas an opportunity to think of a tactic to deal with the English cogs. Your Majesty, I have studied the sea conditions of the English Channel, the French name for the English Channel, and found that the wind and waves are strong in winter and smaller in summer. Sometimes, there is a breeze, and occasionally there is no wind. And your Majesty should know that there is a breeze or even no wind all year round in the Mediterranean. Therefore, paddle boats are usually used there. In the Atlantic Ocean and the English Channel, where the wind is stronger, sailboats are more often used. And when there is a breeze or even no wind, paddle boats have an absolute advantage. Because, if there is a lack of wind, the sailboat will lie on the sea and cannot move, or move very slowly. But paddle boats are different. Although the sails cannot provide much power when there is a breeze or no wind. However, we have oars. In a breeze or even no wind, the maneuverability of the sailboat is basically useless, and the paddle boat has an advantage because of the presence of oars. So, I thought of a tactic against the English fleet. On summer days with breezes or no wind, send paddle boats to deal with British warships. Wait, I want to ask, Mr. Bidas, how do you ensure the safety of the galleys in the garrison? How do you deal with the English fleet coming to destroy the warships? John Laffey interrupted. Regent Bidas thought for a moment and replied, in fact, someone has already provided us with a role model, Marin, the Grand Duke of the North Sea. What? You mean? Francois I was surprised. Build a fort to guard the mouth of the Brest Bay. I've been to Brest Harbor and found it to be a great shelter. Moreover, the Crozon Peninsula to the south of the harbor extends into the sea, just wrapping up the Brest Bay. If we learn from the practice of Grand Duke Marin of the North Sea Kingdom and set up a fort on the northwest corner of the Crozon Peninsula, and at the same time, set up a fort on the seashore west of Brest on the opposite bank, we can block the invasion of enemy warships. With the protection of the fort, even if England knows there are warships in the harbor, what can they do? They can't get in. Good. Francois I excitedly clapped his hands on the table and cheered loudly. Based on this suggestion alone, I have decided to use you. With the protection of the fort, the Brest Bay will become a safe naval port, and we will no longer be afraid of the English coming again. Mr. Bidas, I have decided to appoint you as the commander of the Brest fleet, and I plan to overhaul the naval port in Brest. At the same time, prepare warships. By the way, do they have to be galleys? Francois I asked. Bidas replied, strictly speaking, after the transformation of raising the mast and expanding the sail area, this kind of ship can no longer be called a galley, but should be called a sailing ship. Sailing ship, doesn't sound good. Francois I frowned, and then continued, well, the introduction of this kind of ship is to prepare for the recapture of Calais fortress. Therefore, how about naming this kind of sailing ship, Calais ship? Your Majesty is wise. What can others say? The king has taken the name, and everyone can only agree. Then, this kind of sailing ship was called Calais ship. Compared with the authentic galley, it is to strengthen the sail and enhance the maneuverability in areas with strong winds. For a time, the king and his ministers were all happy in celebrating the birth of the Calais ship. Only John Lafitte, the spy, frowned quietly and felt a little troublesome. But no one present knew that this kind of Calais ship was a brilliant one in the original history. Even, it influenced the naval warfare thinking of the Kingdom of France for hundreds of years. Originally in history, Regent Bidas was actually recruited by Louis XII in 1512 to fight against England at sea. At that time, the monarch of England was Henry VIII. Henry VIII frequently ordered England to attack the French coast, causing huge losses to France. In desperation, Louis XII had to hire Regent Bidas to bring several Gal ships to try to confront the English navy. As a result, this trick worked wonders. With 6 small Gal ships of about 200 tons, Regent Bidas frequently attacked England. In the end, he also killed Edward Howard, the commander of the English navy. Then, for decades, England lived under the shadow of the Gal ships and found it difficult to find effective means to deal with them. Of course, this is not without benefits. For England, the resulting benefit is that England later eliminated the cog sailing ship and gradually developed the galleon ship that is more suitable for great voyages and naval battles. Before the appearance of the galleon ship, England felt the fear of the Gal ship for decades. The above is all true history. The next chapter will explain the reasons for the formation of the naval warfare ideas of Britain and France. Chapter 1846 The origin of French naval warfare thought. Of course, that was the original history. In this time and space, England has undergone earth-shaking changes because of Marin's intrusion. Henry VII and Henry VIII had both been killed long ago. After Edward came to power, he and France were in a state of discord for a long time, and there were not many conflicts between the two countries. It was not until England reoccupied the Calais fortress that the two countries tore their faces again and began to fight each other at sea. Before that, the two countries were still relatively restrained. Even if England attacked French ships, it was disguised as pirates. Moreover, the English had never attacked French naval ports. Therefore, the Italian naval commander Regent Bidas, who was supposed to be hired by Louis XII in 1512 in history, was not recommended to the new French king François I by Count Charles until 1516 in this time and space. But as in history, this modified paddle boat is still called the Calais ship, which shows the determination of the Kingdom of France to regain the Calais fortress. After celebrating the birth of the Calais ship, everyone's enthusiasm gradually subsided. At this time, John Lafitte asked Regent Bidas another sharp question, "Mr. Bidas, what you said before about sending galleys to attack when the wind is small or even without wind is indeed a good idea. But my question is, even if in this case the galleys are more powerful than the English cogs. But the question is, how can you guarantee that the galleys will be able to defeat the English cogs? You know, the English pirates are very fierce. To fight against them, it is useless to rely solely on more powerful ships." Regent Bidas said confidently, "Don't worry, Lord John, in addition to the aspect of maneuverability, I have thought about it. I also have a way to attack English warships. Otherwise, I would not dare to appear in front of your Majesty." "Oh, I wonder how you plan to deal with English warships." John Lafitte's eyes flashed. Regent Bidas said confidently, "I am from Italy and have fought against the Turks for the Venetian fleet. As early as 1499, the Venetian navy and the Turkish navy fought a naval battle in Zocchio. In this battle, the powerful Venetian navy was defeated by the Turkish navy. In addition to the fact that the Turkish ships were large, it was mainly because the Turks equipped the bow of their largest flagship with 2 large stone-throwing cannons that could fire 150-pound to 200-pound stone bullets. This type of stone-throwing cannon is extremely powerful. The huge stones weighing 100 or 200 pounds were smashed down, and 2 warships of the Venetian fleet were sunk on the spot. The morale of the Venetian fleet plummeted, and then they lost the naval battle. After this battle, the Venetians learned from their mistakes and imitated this kind of cannon on the bow. At present, many Venetian warships are equipped with this kind of imitation cannon on the bow, and they call it basilisk. This basilisk cannon weighs about 7,000 pounds and can fire 50-pound stone bullets. If it can hit the side of the English cog, there is a high probability that it will break the side of the cog, causing the English warship to sink." "You mean?" François I stood up excitedly. "Yes, Your Majesty, I plan to use this basilisk cannon and 50-pound stone bullets to smash the English warships. For this purpose, I have specially designed a set of tactics." Regent Bidas said respectfully. "Tell me quickly." François I was already a little impatient. "Yes, Your Majesty. It's like this. I plan to import several small warships with 150 oars, displacement of about 200 tons, from Venice. Each ship will be equipped with a lizard cannon on the top. Wait, why not just import larger warships? With our friendly relationship with Venice, Venice should not be stingy, right?" François I was a little unhappy. As a monarch of a great country, he likes to use big ones, not small ones. Regent Bidas smiled bitterly and said, "It's not that we can't import them. Venice is willing to give them. The biggest problem is that large ships can't pass through the Strait of Gibraltar." The French monarchs and ministers present suddenly remembered the roadblock of the Strait of Gibraltar. Because of the existence of the Strait of Gibraltar, Spain used this strait to block the Mediterranean, making it impossible for large warships of France and even Venice to pass through the strait smoothly. Otherwise, if the Mediterranean and the Atlantic were connected, France would have become a maritime power long ago. But the existence of the Strait of Gibraltar directly cut the French maritime power into 2 parts. Each part was not strong and encountered stronger opponents such as Spain and Britain. It was extremely tragic. out of containment of France and vigilance against Venice. Spain would definitely obstruct large warships that weighed hundreds of tons at first glance and would not allow them to pass through the Strait of Gibraltar. Just like the Variag aircraft carrier in later generations, it was trapped in the Turkish Strait for 2 years. There was no way, the Turkish Strait blocked the Black Sea, and if people didn't let it pass, it couldn't pass. The Strait of Gibraltar is narrower than the Turkish Strait and easier to block. Otherwise, Venice would have rushed out of the Mediterranean and surfed the Atlantic Ocean. It was because of the existence of the Strait of Gibraltar at the throats of France and Venice were directly blocked. Therefore, after the decline of the Spanish Empire, the newly rising Britain took the opportunity to occupy the Strait of Gibraltar and dominated it for hundreds of years. Until the 21st century, it refused to return it. Obviously, Regent Bidas is very smart. He knew that Spain would not allow a large galley to pass through the Strait of Gibraltar, even if it was disguised as a civilian merchant ship. A medium-sized ship of about 200 tons, if properly equipped, would just meet Spain's psychological requirements and be allowed to pass through the Strait of Gibraltar. Francois I nodded solemnly and said, I understand, Lord Regent. I want to ask you, how many modified galleys can you get from Venice in the fastest time? Can they be immediately combat-ready? Regent Bidas said directly, I can get 6 modified galleys, all of which are warships I commanded when I served in the Venetian naval squadron. Not only can I get those 6 ships, but I can also persuade all the captains, sailors and rowers on those ships to come and join your majesty. Of course, your majesty needs to give them higher treatment than in Venice. In addition, the captain and the first mate need some incentives. Francois I nodded and said, I understand. As long as you can defeat the British, even if it is a small victory, I will not be stingy with rewards. Titles, land, money. I can afford them all. Regent Bidas breathed a sigh of relief and said, that's no problem. I can summon them with just one letter. As for the ships, I believe Venice will agree to sell them to France. At this time, John Laffey interrupted, what about the specific tactics? You haven't mentioned the tactics yet. The other nobles present were also waiting for Regent Bidas's explanation with great interest. Regent Bidas explained, in the case of weak wind, this type of gal can burst out faster than a sailing ship. Taking advantage of the speed, I plan to let these 6 gal quickly approach the enemy fleet. Then, concentrate our strength and use the lizard cannon on the bow to bombard the side of 1 or 2 English warships and try to sink them. After a successful round of bombardment, the ship quickly turned around and fled to avoid being entangled by the English warships and jumping off the boat. In order to avoid being caught up by the English warships, we must be in the leeward position, that is, in the downwind position. This way, it is very convenient for the warship to escape with the wind and prevent the enemy from catching up. After our lizard cannons have been loaded, the Calais ship that had escaped originally relied on the power of the rowers to turn the bow again and bombard the front English warship head-on. After a successful attack, it quickly fled with the wind. In this way, we can avoid the bloodiest boarding battle with the English ships. The 50-pound lizard cannon stone shells are so powerful that they can easily sink the English warships. In the end, we can sink or damage multiple English warships without causing any losses to our own warships, and achieve the goal of victory. Okay, if this method is really effective, I will never be stingy with titles, fiefs and money. Lord Regent, do a good job, I am optimistic about you. After reacting, Francois I patted Regent Bidas on the shoulder excitedly and encouraged him. Originally in history, it was the Calais and roving tactics that Regent Bidas came up with that caused England to suffer for decades. If it weren't for the fact that there were more windy days in the English Channel, which gave the Calais less time to play, the French Navy might have completely suppressed the English Navy. And the consequence of this tactic is that until the era of sailing warships, the French could not change their habit of liking to be in the leeward side, and they were used to running away after firing a round of volleys. Because it is easier to escape in the leeward side. The English Navy, on the other hand, likes to fight desperately in boarding battles, so they prefer to grab the upwind side. Regardless of the pros and cons of these 2 naval warfare ideas, it is an indisputable fact that England has always suppressed France at sea. However, this is also related to the fact that England has more ships and more sailors, so it cannot be directly said that this roving tactic is not good. In fact, in the 1588 Anglo-French naval battle, England also used this tactic to deal with the Invincible Armada, and it was successful. In any case, the Gaullais and the hit-and-run naval warfare ideas did affect France for hundreds of years in history. And the initiator was the Italian named Bidas. Chapter 1847, Lizard Cannon and Concrete Shells. Marin didn't know much about the origin of the tactics of the Calais and the French escaping from the downwind. He used to be a European player, not a fan of the Great Voyage. So, he really didn't know some things. So much so that he didn't know that the French Navy's Calais played tricks on Britain for decades in the early 16th century. Naturally, he didn't know about Bidas. It's no wonder that the Chinese in later generations did not describe European history in detail. When it comes to naval battles, they often start from the Anglo-Spanish naval battle. As for the naval battles before the Anglo-Spanish naval battle, there are often few descriptions. Only the most hardcore fans of the sailing system will know those secrets. Therefore, when John Lafitte sent the news of Bidas's appearance and the Calais roaming fighting tactics back to Auric, Marin did not take it too seriously. However, after careful consideration, Marin had to admit that this tactic might really make England suffer. After all, England's warships are now primitive cog sailing ships recruited from the people, and the hulls are relatively thin. If you really get hit by a 50-pound stone bullet, you will not be able to bear it. Then, he became very interested in the Venetian lizard cannon. The Venetian lizard cannon was mainly imitated from Turkey, weighing 7,000 pounds and made of bronze. The shells it fired were stone bullets weighing 50 pounds. Although the defense-breaking ability was not as good as the iron ball shells, the weight was there, and whoever was hit would be unlucky. In particular, the warships with very thin sides in this era could not withstand being hit at all. The lizard cannon was called the lizard cannon because it was ugly, thick and short, and the gun body was deliberately made to look like a lizard with its mouth open. In other words, it was a mortar, which was the predecessor of the mortar. In Russia, this lizard cannon also has a famous name, the unicorn cannon. In this era, due to the limitations of the casting process, all large-caliber artillery were almost short and thick mortars. Because large-caliber artillery with long barrels could not be made at all in this era. Marin had seen the pictures sent back from Italy and was shocked by the ugly appearance of the lizard cannon. Damn, this is a gasoline barrel with a much thicker barrel wall. Its caliber is not much different from that of a gasoline barrel, but the barrel wall is much thicker than that of a gasoline barrel. But the lengths of the two are somewhat similar, both short and thick. But this kind of artillery is cast in bronze, and the casting difficulty is much smaller than that of an iron cannon. In short, as long as the barrel wall is made thick enough, a large caliber mortar can be cast. However, the range of this kind of mortar is generally short, only a few hundred meters. In general, in naval battles, it is necessary to get close to the enemy ship and suddenly fire a shot. However, because the recoil of large-caliber artillery is very large. In order to prevent the ship from falling apart, this large-caliber mortar can only be placed in the most solid part of the bow structure. If it is placed on the side, it is either easy to capsize or easy to make the ship fall apart. Moreover, because copper tends to soften after overheating. If forced to fire continuously, the gun body is easy to deform when overheated. Therefore, bronze mortars cannot fire continuously. After each shot, if the gun body feels hot, a damp mop will be used to cool the gun body to avoid firing when overheated, which will cause the gun barrel to deform. Therefore, the firing speed of this bronze mortar is very touching. It usually takes several minutes to fire one shot, and there is usually only one lizard cannon in the whole ship. Therefore, the efficiency of the lizard cannon is generally not high. But if you are hit by one shot, it will be uncomfortable. With the current structural strength of ships in various countries, if they are hit by a 50-pound stone bullet, the worst ships will fall apart directly. Better ships will also be seriously injured. If they are hit on the side, they will basically leak. Really leak. Marin deduced and found that although the design efficiency of this lizard cannon is low, the effect is better. If you can hit the enemy ship, the effect will be absolutely great. Even the 250-level armed merchant ship of the North Sea Kingdom may not be able to withstand the attack of a 50-pound stone bullet. Only the 500-ton warships of the North Sea Kingdom, which were specially reinforced and wrapped with iron sheets on the sides, could withstand the attack of 50-pound stone bullets without leaking. In other words, this kind of lizard cannon is very effective in naval battles. Although it is ugly and takes several minutes to reload once. But it is really powerful. As long as it hits, there will be results. The only problem is that mortars are all projectiles, and aiming is extremely difficult. To hit the enemy ship with a projectile, a very high shooting level is required. Fortunately, the lizard cannon is generally placed at the bow, facing the front. Because the ship will only sway left and right, not back and forth, it provides a lot of convenience for the aiming of the lizard cannon. For naval battles, aiming the broadside guns is the most difficult, because the hull will sway left and right, which makes aiming too difficult. Aiming the main gun at the bow is much simpler, and the ship will not sway back and forth. But the problem is that the mortar is a projectile, not a flat shot, and it is really difficult for ordinary people to aim and shoot. But this problem is not difficult for Marin. Venice, as the birthplace of the lizard cannon, must have masters who are proficient in aiming and shooting lizard cannons. At that time, I will recruit them with high salaries to teach the gunners of the North Sea Kingdom. At present, the research and development of the Pexang cannon is still in progress, and the North Sea Kingdom lacks super-large caliber main guns. If this kind of lizard cannon can be introduced, the results of the war will probably be brilliant. Just think about it, if a 50-pound shell hits the Portuguese warship, it will be so powerful. So, Marin immediately ordered to introduce 20 lizard cannons from Venice to equip the bows of 2,500-ton warships. Once the battle starts, the lizard cannons on the 20 warships will fire together. As long as the accuracy is not too bad, 1 or 2 Portuguese warships can always be smashed. As for why the lizard cannon shoots stone bullets instead of iron balls, Marin can understand it very well. Because the steel production is extremely low in this year. It is simply a luxury to use steel to make a cannonball that sinks to the bottom of the sea after one shot. 50 pounds of iron can be used to make dozens of steel farm tools. So, under the premise of the impressive steel production, it is understandable that everyone chooses stone bullets. After all, even if a 50-pound stone misses and sinks to the bottom of the sea, everyone is not so distressed. What if you change it to a 50-pound iron ball and sink it to the bottom of the sea? In the final analysis, it is still a cost issue. Because it is a naval battle, the possibility of the cannonball being recovered becomes infinitely small, and the possibility of sinking to the bottom of the sea is very high. If it is replaced with a 50-pound iron ball, the user will feel distressed if one falls into the sea. Moreover, if the North Sea Kingdom uses the lizard cannon, it can be made even simpler, casting the cannonball with cement. A 50-pound stone ball may be difficult to process and transport, but if it is a cement ball, it will be much simpler. A pure one will definitely be too loose and easy to break. Therefore, before casting a 50-pound cement ball, you can fill some steel bars inside the cement ball. Not only can it enhance the strength of cement balls, but it can also be more powerful when smashing ships. Therefore, while Marin ordered the introduction of 27,000-pound lizard cannons, he also ordered craftsmen to study the use of reinforced concrete to cast 50-pound concrete shells for use in naval battles. As for iron ball shells, it's not that the North Sea Kingdom can't afford them. But if the shells are suddenly changed, the artillery itself needs to be modified. Marin doesn't have time to modify the lizard cannon now, so he can only make do with reinforced concrete with a density similar to stone as shells. As for the heavy artillery using iron ball shells, this may require improvements by professionals. Chapter 1848, Expansion of the Navy. The density of iron ball shells and stone shells differs by nearly 3 times, so if iron ball shells of equal weight are used, the caliber must be reduced to more than 1.4 of the original. The change in the material of the shells will also affect the change in the amount of gunpowder loaded. If the charge is increased rashly, it is easy to cause the chamber to explode. Therefore, Marin did not dare to change the material of the shells easily. What's more, it is still a copper cannon that is prone to problems. Moreover, with the structural strength of ships in other countries in this era, 50-pound stone shells are enough. Moreover, if reinforced concrete structures are used, the strength of concrete shells may exceed that of ordinary stone shells, and it is also very durable to use them to smash ships. In addition, its processing difficulty is still very low. The difficulty of processing stones into stone balls weighing several pounds and into large stone balls weighing 50 pounds is geometrically increased. If you want to reserve a batch of 50-pound stone balls, the processing difficulty alone is amazing. But if you change to the cement casting method, the manufacturing difficulty and cost will be greatly reduced. Even if a batch of iron wire is filled inside the concrete shell, the cost is much simpler than grinding a natural big stone into a 50-pound stone ball shell. Moreover, the cost is also lower. After all, although the cost of drawing iron wire in this era is relatively high because it is artificially made, it is always cheaper than transporting a huge stone weighing hundreds of pounds to a stone shop and grinding it into a stone ball. Moreover, the strength of reinforced concrete is stronger than that of natural stone. In fact, Marin not only improved the shell manufacturing method of the lizard cannon, but also planned to improve the manufacturing process of the lizard cannon. It plans to use low-carbon steel instead of copper to cast a short-barreled mortar such as the lizard cannon. It is impossible because of the cost. It takes 7,000 pounds of bronze to cast a lizard cannon. How expensive is it? 20 lizard cannons are equivalent to 140,000 pounds of bronze. And according to the copper price in Europe at this time, this is equivalent to nearly 10,000 pounds of silver. Converted into gold coins, the total price is 99,000 gold coins. But this is only the material cost, and in fact, the price of artillery is often double the material cost. In other words, to purchase these 20 lizard cannons, Marin will have to spend at least 198,000 gold coins, close to 200,000 gold coins. Therefore, even if Marin is rich, he can't buy too many lizard cannons at once, and can only buy 20 first. Next, the craftsmen of the domestic cannon foundry will study how to use low-carbon steel to cast lizard cannons. If this kind of cannon is cast with steel, the cost will be reduced by dozens of times. At that time, once the development is successful, Marin plans to equip the capital of each 250-level armed merchant ship with a lizard cannon. When dozens of armed merchant ships fire together, even if the accuracy is not very good, as long as 1 or 2 shots hit the opponent's ship can be finished. In addition, Marin wants to increase the experience of the North Sea cannon foundry craftsmen in casting large-caliber cannons through the casting of lizard cannons, and increase the experience reserved for the development of Pexang cannons. To this end, Marin plans to dig several craftsmen who are good at casting lizard cannons from Venice at a high salary, and cast lizard cannons specifically for the North Sea Kingdom. At that time, Marin will arrange for the best cannon casting craftsmen in the North Sea Kingdom to learn from them so as to be inspired. After all, stones from other mountains can sharpen jade, and perhaps the influence of this cannon casting process can inspire their thinking of developing the Pexang cannon. However, influenced by this incident, Marin has a new naval construction thinking. It also plans to add a batch of gal ships to the navy. No, strictly speaking, Marin plans to add a batch of sailing oars similar to gal ships to the navy as an important supplement to the navy. Although Marin does not know the glorious record of gal ships in history, he can imagine the superiority of this warship from the structural characteristics and armament of gal ships. However, the gal ship is actually a minor change made on the basis of the original Venetian galley. Strictly speaking, this is still a galley, which is not very suitable for the sea conditions in the Atlantic and North Sea regions. In fact, Marin's judgment is completely correct. Although the Calais are extremely powerful in light wind conditions, the problem is that there are few light winds in the Atlantic and the English Channel, and most of the time it is still beneficial to the English sailing warships. Therefore, most of the year, the French Calais can only hide in the naval port, waiting for the arrival of light wind weather, which is very passive. If it were not for this reason, the French fleet would have suppressed the British fleet and seized sea power. Although Marin did not know this history, he had his own judgment. He believed that in order to make the lizard cannon play a better combat effectiveness, there must be a ship with better motor power. For this reason, Marin decided to send someone to develop a sailing or ship that is more suitable for the Atlantic and North Sea conditions. Among them, the sail arrangement will become the most important part. As for the oars, it is more like adding them to the sailing ship. In other words, its design thinking is reversed from that of the Calais. The Calais is based on the paddle sailing ship to enhance the role of the sail. The sailing or ship that Marin wants to design is the opposite. It is based on the sailing warship as the parent model, and it is improved by adding oar positions. In essence, the gal is still a paddle boat, but it has been improved with sails, while the sailing paddle boat that Marin asked to design is essentially a sailing boat, but it has added oars. Although the two are not very different in words, the actual difference is still very large. After all, the gal is an improvement on the paddle boat. In the sea conditions with strong winds, the maneuverability is still insufficient. The sailing paddle boat that Marin ordered to develop is essentially a sailing boat. In the case of strong winds, it is not affected too much and is more suitable for use in the Atlantic and North Seas. Similarly, it is also conducive to use in the English Channel. In the future, Marin will annex England. At that time, the North Sea fleet will directly face the French gal. Therefore, it is very necessary to develop a warship that can restrain the opponent. Even in low wind weather, it must be stronger than the French gal. In addition, Marin is very interested in the roving fighting tactics proposed by Bidas. This is simply the idea of naval warfare in later generations using artillery to solve problems and refusing boarding battles. In fact, the Navy of the North Sea also has this idea. For example, the main battleships of the North Sea Kingdom are equipped with a lot of artillery, ready to completely solve the opponent with vitality. But the problem is that the cost of a salvo of broadside guns is too high. After a naval battle, each battleship consumes at least several tons of gunpowder alone. For example, England's famous sailing battleship, Victory, needs to reserve 35 tons of gunpowder and 120 tons of shells every time it goes to war. After a naval battle, not to mention that all these gunpowder and shells are consumed, more than half will be consumed. This scale of consumption, even Marin, feels very strenuous. You know, the British can fire so vigorously in later generations, which is inseparable from their strong national strength. When sailing battleships such as Victory were in service, Britain had entered the stage of the Industrial Revolution, and its national strength was strong, far from being comparable to Marin, who now relies solely on farming. An industrial country naturally has the confidence to consume gunpowder and iron ball shells. But Marin is still a farmer now. It's okay to consume a lot of gunpowder and iron ball shells occasionally, but it's not enough to do it all the time. Therefore, learning from the French, getting some sailing paddle boats similar to the Calais ship and equipping them with lizard cannons has become a good choice. Don't look at the large caliber of the lizard cannon and the high consumption of gunpowder. But the problem is that a warship is equipped with only one lizard cannon. Even if the lizard cannon keeps firing, the consumption of gunpowder is limited by one cannon alone. However, the results of the war are good enough. In this era, the warships of various countries have not been thickened. Once hit by a 50-pound stone bullet, the probability of sinking is very high. Therefore, from an economic and practical point of view, it is the most cost-effective to use a sailing boat equipped with a lizard cannon. Of course, this does not mean that Marin will give up the idea of naval construction with cannons and giant ships. Because that is the mainstream of the future. Strictly speaking, the sailing boats using lizard cannons are just taking advantage of the loopholes of this era. Taking advantage of the fact that the warships of other countries have not been thickened yet, they are just taking advantage of a wave of advantages. When other countries react, the shipbuilding industry will be affected. In history, the British galleon appeared in this way purely a method forced out by the abuse of the French gal. In other words, this kind of warship and tactics can only be rampant for a while when other countries have not had time to thicken and reinforce the hull. By the time people react, this kind of ship will be out of history. For this reason, Marin does not intend to toss too much. He directly ordered the shipbuilding craftsmen to use the 250 class armed merchant ship as the parent model, to carry out the transformation, increase the oar position, thicken the side, and install a lizard cannon on the bow. Using a mature ship type for modification will shorten a lot of time. Once the modification is successful, it can be put into use soon. Marin plans to add 20 modified sailing oars first, so that the scale of the main battle fleet of the North Sea Kingdom will be expanded to 60 ships. In this way, the main combat force of the North Sea Kingdom in the future will become 20 500-ton warships, 20 250 class armed merchant ships, and 20 modified 250 class sailing oars using lizard cannons. Such a naval scale may not be considered anything after the 18th century. However, in this era, it is an absolutely powerful maritime force. Especially the 20 250 modified sailing ships equipped with lizard guns. If all 20 lizard guns are used together, plus the 20 warships also have lizard guns, 40 large caliber guns that fire 50-pound reinforced concrete shells will definitely beat the unprepared enemy to pieces. Chapter 1849, The Black Pearl, and Captain Jack. It is not a very urgent matter to transform the 250 class armed merchant ship into a sailing ship. The most important thing at present is to transform 1 or 2 British pirate ships to retaliate against the Portuguese. For some reason, Marin was very interested in the transformation of the pirate ship. So he came to the Emden shipyard in person to participate in the transformation of the British cog sailing ship. The British cog sailing ship is actually basically the same as the German cog sailing ship, because the cog sailing ship was originally learned by the British from the Hanseatic League. Therefore, it is not difficult for Marin to get a cog sailing ship. In the dock, a cog sailing ship of more than 200 tons is resting on the bracket. The water in the dock has been drained to facilitate the transformation of the craftsman. Since it is a pirate ship, speed is naturally the priority. Therefore, Marin waved his hand and said, increase the height of the mast and use a larger area of high-strength sisal sails. This is the simplest decision. For a sailing ship, the larger the sail area, the faster the speed. In addition, Marin pointed at the bow and stern and commanded, the mast at the stern should be replaced with a triangular sail to make use of the wind from the side. This is the consistent practice of fully equipped sailing ships later, so as to improve the utilization rate of wind. In addition, this is also a preparation for intercepting Portuguese transport ships. Because, when Portuguese merchant ships return to their country, they must go north along the coast of Africa. And the north-south routes are often winded from the side, and there is rarely a positive tailwind. Therefore, it is more appropriate to use triangular sails on the route of Portuguese merchant ships returning to their country. So Marin continued to order, the 2 masts in front should also be prepared to replace large triangular sails. If there is really a side wind, using triangular sails is the most correct approach. In fact, the North Sea Kingdom has a better upper edge girder sail than the triangular sail. But the upper edge girder sail is being kept secret by the North Sea Kingdom, and this advanced sail is only allowed to be used in the uninhabited area of the Atlantic Ocean. When it comes to crowded areas, it must be replaced with ordinary sails. Moreover, this time the pirate ship is to disguise itself as a British pirate, so naturally it cannot use such advanced things. In addition, Marin did not want the Portuguese to learn this kind of sail. Therefore, Marin could only use the old-fashioned sail. However, the area has increased a lot, and the material has been replaced with a reinforced sail with sisal as the tendon. In addition, a very convenient steering wheel system has been installed at the stern to facilitate the rapid turning of the ship. The next is the hull part. Because of the tight time, there is definitely no time to adjust the keel and thicken the side. Therefore, Marin directly adopted a simple and rough approach: nailed tinplate on the hull, a total of 3 layers. 3 layers of tinplate may still be difficult to withstand the heavy shells of the lizard cannon. After all, the impact of that kind of shell can easily smash the side structure protected by the iron sheet. However, there is no problem in using it to resist the Portuguese cannon. Portuguese merchant ships are generally equipped with cannons. Only on the main battleships will 12-pound main guns be installed. For general merchant ships, it is almost enough to equip a few more 3-pound cannons, at most 6 pounds. In this way, as long as 3 layers of tinplate are nailed to the side, there is no need to fear the attack of small-caliber artillery on Portuguese merchant ships. In this way, the modification of the ship is basically completed. Next, the craftsmen only need to use the same method to continue to modify a few cog sailing ships. Then, Marin went to pick people. In order to pretend to be a pirate, Marin really asked Kohler to instruct the North Sea spies in London to recruit a group of reliable people with pirate experience to join the pirate ship. These old pirates are familiar with the methods of British pirates and act in their true colors without pretending. The sailors under Marin only need to cooperate with them and imitate their behavior. Among them, a middle-aged pirate leader named Jack aroused Marin's strong interest. Because Marin actually found that this guy looked like Captain Jack in Pirates of the Caribbean. However, his name is not Jack Sparrow, but Jack Weeks. But Marin doesn't care so much, and they are pretending to be pirates this time, so they naturally don't need to use their real names. So, Marin waved his hand, so, when you rob, you will pretend to be the captain. From now on, you will be called Jack Sparrow, and everyone will call you Captain Jack. It's decided happily. Jack Weeks was confused how could he change his surname. But thinking that he was going to pretend to be a pirate this time, he figured it out. It would be best not to use his real name. After all, the relationship between Britain and Portugal is good. If he used his real name, he would be reported to London by Portugal, and he would be wanted in England. Since there is Captain Jack, there must be a corresponding ship. So, Marin happily decided this first pirate ship will be called the Black Pearl. Captain Jack and a group of hired English pirates looked at Marin in a daze, but after thinking about it, they still accepted it. There is no way, Marin is their employer, and he is a king. He is awesome, and what he says is what he says. They can only accept it and have no confidence to refute. Since it is the Black Pearl, it must be black. Therefore, Marin directly had the entire ship painted black, even the tinplate was painted black, making the whole ship look black. However, in terms of firepower configuration, Marin could not learn from the Black Pearl and use 32 6-pound guns. Moreover, the small cog ship of more than 200 tons did not have so many gun positions. In particular, there was no lower gun deck. Therefore, Marin could only adapt to the situation and install a cannon on the bow and stern of the ship according to the characteristics of the cog sailing ship with higher ends, forecastle and poop, both of which were 12 pounds. Pirates often do not fight head-on at sea, because merchant ships often do not have the courage to fight pirate ships. Therefore, in battles at sea, merchant ships often escape in front and pirate ships chase behind. Therefore, a main gun on the bow is necessary, and the side guns are basically useless. Of course, pirate ships also have bad luck, for example, encountering warships. At this time, the pirate ship needs to rely on speed to escape. At this time, it is best to have a cannon at the stern to curb the pursuit of warships. Therefore, pirate ships often do not need to arrange any cannons on the side, only the cannons at the bow and the stern are enough. As for the broadside cannon, it will only be used when the two navies are just facing each other. Because the goal of the two navies is to destroy the opponent and will not run away easily. More broadside cannons are often more advantageous and easy to sink the opponent. But the purpose of the pirate ship is to rob, not to sink merchant ships. Therefore, broadside cannons are not needed. If the merchant ship is sunk, who will they rob? Therefore, Marin did not arrange a row of guns on the side of the Black Pearl, but only symbolically deployed 3 or 4 rear-mounted Portuguese cannons. This kind of Portuguese cannon is more useful for firing a few shots to scare the people on the merchant ship after running parallel to the merchant ship, rather than sinking the merchant ship. After the ship was modified, Marin patted Jack Vickers on the shoulder and smiled, "Okay, Captain Jack, take your men to practice on the sea." Chapter 1850. It's time to take action on land. Jack Weeks was helpless, but Marlin was his employer, so he had to do it no matter how dissatisfied he was. Moreover, the real commander on the ship was not him, but Captain Danilo, who was pretending to be the first mate. Captain Danilo was the real commander of the ship, and he was also in charge of the affairs on the ship. Only when the Portuguese merchant ship was robbed, Jack Weeks would jump out in the name of Captain Jack and command the pirates to attack the Portuguese merchant ship. In other words, Jack Weeks, the Captain Jack, could only temporarily exercise the power of the pirate captain when robbing Portuguese merchant ships. At other times, he was just a mascot. Moreover, in order to restore the Pirates of the Caribbean, in his mind, Marlin forced Jack Weeks to wear a red headscarf and tie a lot of fashionable braids. What made Jack Weeks collapse the most was that Marlin actually forced him to learn Uncle Depp's orchid finger. Of course, it is mainly used when robbing, and it is not necessary at ordinary times. But in order to successfully rob the Portuguese merchant ship, Marin arranged for the Black Pearl to conduct several ship robbery exercises. Therefore, Jack Vickers conducted countless drills after jumping on the hijacked merchant ship. He raised his orchid finger and spoke in an exaggerated tone. But what surprised Jack was that every time he saw him raise his orchid finger and speak in an exaggerated tone, Marin was extremely excited. He thought Marin had some quirks, but he didn't know that Marin was just excited about copying Captain Jack in this time and space. Moreover, every time he practiced the sword confrontation between pirates and sailors on the ship, Marin, who was watching, always liked to play "He is a Knight" on the violin as the background music. Of course, "He is a Knight" is the name that everyone thinks. In Marin's heart, this is, he is a pirate. Only with the fight of pirates on the ship, it is more suitable for this song. Of course, sending pirates to intercept a Portuguese spice ship is just one of the plans. Marin also needs a few ships to go to Terceira Island to rescue the crew who were turned into plantation slaves. For Marin, who lacks sailors, those 30 or 40 sailors are not many, but they are all Frisians, who are standard-owned people and must be rescued. Moreover, this kind of rescue will make other crew members support him more. Because the crew members can't guarantee that they will not be kidnapped one day. With the precedent of rescuing this group of crew members, other crew members can also feel at ease. If they are abandoned, the enthusiasm of the crew will be hit. For this reason, Marin plans to dispatch 4 armed merchant ships to participate in this operation. But because there are many Portuguese warships stationed in Hero Port not far away, Marin thought about it and planned to get a few more pirate ships to lure the tiger away from the mountain. The so-called luring the tiger away from the mountain is naturally to lure the Portuguese warships stationed in Hero Port to leave Hero Port. As for how to lure away those Portuguese warships, this is easy. Just make trouble on other islands in the Azores. Specifically, send a few ships disguised as British pirate ships to bombard and attack other islands in the Azores, forcing these islands to ask for help from Porto Ingra. Once the warships of Porto Ingra set out for reinforcement, Terceira Island will definitely be empty. At this time, if 4 armed merchant ships are sent to launch a landing battle, the success rate will be very high. As for the location of the attack, Marin has already chosen it São Miguel Island, the southeasternmost island of the Azores. This place is located in the southeast of the Azores, hundreds of kilometers away from Terceira Island in the middle. Once attacked, this place will definitely ask for help from Porto Ingra. If the pirates attack more fiercely and threaten to kill all the people on the island, they can force the main force of the Porto Ingra fleet to come to the rescue. After all, São Miguel Island is the largest island in the Azores and cannot be lost. To this end, Marin plans to send 6 to 7 pirate ships with fierce firepower to bombard São Miguel Island and force Porto Ingra to send ships for rescue. Because there are many pirate ships, Hero Port will definitely not send less ships, otherwise there is no guarantee of winning. Therefore, there is a high probability that all the warships of Hero Port will be transferred. And the distance of hundreds of kilometers, in the era of sail, is enough for a sailboat to run for several days. Using this time difference, the rescue team will have plenty of time to attack Terceira Island and rescue the enslaved North Sea sailors. In order to fight against Portugal, Marin has recruited a large number of experienced sailors from England this time, in the name of the Earl of Newcastle. Many of the recruited English sailors are actually Northumberlanders or Isle of Wight people, all residents of Marin's territory. Therefore, Marin is not afraid that they are not honest. After all, their families are under their rule. If anyone dares to really run to be a pirate, Marin doesn't mind hanging their families. The principle of not bringing disaster to family members is the principle of the later civilized era. In this era, there is no such saying. Of course, these preparations take a long time. Just ship modification and maritime combat training alone will take a lot of time. If we really have to wait until we go south to do it, it will probably take several months. However, the revenge work on land can be started. The news came back from Portugal. The spies there have already contacted a large number of people and are ready to go to Baron Silva for revenge and sabotage. In the past, the spies of the North Sea Kingdom stationed in Portugal were busy hiring thugs. After all, they have more important things to do in Portugal, so there is no need to go to Baron Silva to sabotage. Therefore, it is best to hire thugs to do this. In this year, because the economy of all countries is very bad, there is no shortage of desperate people in any country. As long as they are paid enough, these people dare to do anything. What's more, Marin didn't ask to kill anyone this time, but just to sabotage Baron Silva. Of course, these charges are also serious, but for those desperate people, as long as they are paid enough, these things are really nothing. For example, burning the reserve wood in Baron Silva's territory and the task of the wood processing plant are also serious crimes. However, it is actually difficult to be caught for arson alone. After all, even in the future, will there still be news of wildfires? The burning of wood stored in forest farms and timber processing plants is no small matter, but it can also be attributed to the ridiculous reason of wildfires. As for destroying the wine in the winery and killing the cattle and sheep raised by local farmers, although it is excessive, it is almost impossible to solve the case with the level of police in this era. As long as you are not caught in the act, it is difficult to be punished. Seeing that Portugal has prepared manpower, Marin no longer hesitated and directly ordered, on land, you can take action.